that Doc's house was on fire. I mean, it was like you was dreaming. But I watched all of it. He didn't have a chance. My world. Ripped away from me. My heart was just broken. And then they said somebody killed Doc. It just didn't make no sense.
That's beautiful. This is the Appalachian Riviera. You know, it's like Italy or Greece in a way, just built into the hillside. We are in McDowell County, West Virginia. It's the heart of coal mining country, and there was a period in time where this was a really thriving community. Coal was king, and they had all these historic downtown areas that were bustling. Yeager, the town we're going to in McDowell County in 2019, was clocked in with a population of 264. So this is, hands down, the smallest town we've been to.
My family, all of us, has been raised here in the town of Yeager. A lot of families grow up here and stay here because whether blood related or not, we consider everybody family.
In McDowell County, no matter where you go, people just come up and say, hey, how are you? Who are you? If they don't know you. And pretty much become your friend right there.
We work hard. We take care of each other. We are fighters. Just because they took the coal away does not mean we're done and we're finished. We are fighting hard to come back with even better things.
Hot dog, it's like a time capsule. You can tell exactly when the industry and the businesses and the livelihood of this town dried up. Montgomery Ward is a relic from my childhood. And it's just sitting here like they closed up shop one day and never came back. In 2005, there was a tragic house fire here in Yeager, West Virginia, that would leave this community fighting and looking for justice for years.
No,
This is Shirley, Dr. Whitley's office. There's smoke coming out of the doctor's house.
Dr. Whitley's clinic was right next door to his house. Clinic staff, they went rushing over there and saw that there was a fire.
We need someone. Can you get the fire department? Somebody come.
yeah, I can do that.
Would you please?
Okay.
The firefighters went in the house and saw that there was a fire in the living room. The couch was on fire. And there was burning debris coming from the ceiling. And there was a tremendous amount of smoke and heat. They ran up the steps and found Dr. Whitley there in the bedroom.
When I got that call Tuesday morning that Doc's house was on fire, my first thought was Doc was smoking in bed and caught the bed on fire. I get over there, and the only thing I know is to get in the house to get Doc. Well, I got to the top of the landing and seen him laying there. The fire chief told me there's nothing more you could do. Doc has passed. And when they brought him out, gosh, it hurt so bad watching him. When I first met Doc, I was probably 4 or 5. He was my doctor all my life, and he would really inspire me to be a nurse. He's seen the potential in me. I was a doctor's nurse for 25 years. To lose him was just like losing my daddy or my mom.
Our 2 fire investigators in the fire marshal's office were Robbie Bailey, a very young fella, and Tony Domingo. They began their investigation that day. The bedroom scene was suspicious because Dr. Whitley could not walk very well on his own. He'd had a fall several years earlier and had to have help getting around through a motorized chair. They noticed that the motorized chair had been pushed several feet away from the bed. Dr. Whitley is in the floor, and it appeared he had been attempting to crawl out of the bedroom to escape the fire. There had been an intense fire. The bed had been destroyed. There was a hole in the bedroom floor through which you can see the living room. The fire had burned completely through this hardwood bedroom floor. The fire investigators believe that someone had set the fire by pouring a flammable liquid or accelerant onto the bedroom floor. They collected multiple samples to send to the state police forensic laboratory. You have a fire in the bedroom floor upstairs, and then downstairs in the living room you have a couch on fire. So it did appear that there were two separate fires with separate causes of ignition. The law enforcement officers felt like those circumstances indicated there had been some foul play. It wasn't just an accidental fire. Under our felony murder rule, if someone dies during a deliberately set fire, it's first-degree murder.
Who would kill Doctor? I couldn't think of anybody that would want Doc dead.
Everybody in this county knew who Doc Whitley was. He took care of people whether they had any money to pay him or not. He took care of them.
Doc Whitley was really something special. Doc and Kathy Lively, his nurse, took care of me and my family really well. When I got a phone call that Doc had passed and burned up in a fire, that was just a shock.
We are going to meet Sid Bell, and he was the prosecutor for McDowell County in 2005 when the fire at Doc Whitley's house took place. This is new for me because we have reached out to prosecutors' offices in pretty much all of our cases, and they usually do not want to talk with us. But Sid agreed. Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
Obviously, in a small town, when something traumatic happens, everybody knows about it pretty quickly. In this case, the victim, Doc Whitley, was that someone that you knew?
Yes.
So when you heard about his passing, how did that impact you personally?
Well, I was shocked, of course, because they told me that they suspected arson. I don't know of anybody who ever physically threatened or did anything to harm Dr. Whitley. But he had political enemies in the county. He was involved in politics. He was in the House of Delegates. At one time, he was president of the McDowell County Commission.
Doc had power in McDowell County in the state. He ran it. If you wanted to run for any office in the state of West Virginia, you came to Doc. If you didn't get Doc's approval before you ran, you wouldn't win.
His idea of campaigning would be to first talk to his patients who came in and out by the dozens every day. They would say, Doc, who do you want us to vote for? Whose signs should we put up? That's the way he ran his political influence. When you're involved in politics, you're going to make enemies.
There's some would probably like to see him dead. But after his injury, where he was in a wheelchair, Doc had lost a lot of his political powers. He didn't go to a lot of meetings like he used to. They voted him out of being president of the committee. It's kind of hard on Doc's ego.
So were any of his political affiliations explored? Did anybody dig into that part of his
I'm
background?
sure they considered that. There was a lot of talk about his enemies, but I think the fact that he had been out of the picture for almost a decade eliminated those from my standpoint. I thought it probably would have been someone who was mad at him over some personal matter rather than a political matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, what was going on with his personal life?
We found out in the course of the investigation that Dr. Whitley, in recent years, had been living at his Coon Branch mountain home, which was several miles away, with his wife, Sue Whitley.
They didn't live in downtown Yeager?
No one was living in his two-story house down beside the clinic. It was just sitting there vacant. So when Dr. Whitley was with his wife on Coon Branch Mountain, his son Jack came in and believed that she was not taking care of his dad, that his bowels were impacted and his health was being neglected. So Dr. Whitley decided to move to Kathy Lively's house so he would be better taken care of.
Is Kathy someone that you are familiar with?
I'd known Kathy a long time. We all liked Kathy, and she was really highly thought of as a nurse.
And Doc Whitley trusted her enough to move from his wife's house into her home.
Right. But when his sons came in to check on him at Kathy's house, they saw a bunch of possessions there that they thought were too expensive for the nurse to be able to afford. They got the idea that she was taking financial advantage of Dr. Whitley.
Oh.
His children said I was taking advantage over his accounts. They said my home looked like a mansion. I worked all my life for what I had. And my home was just like a regular, anybody else's house. Nothing fancy.
There were suspicions that Dr. Whitley was no longer running the clinic, and that Kathy, as an LPN, was issuing prescriptions for narcotics. Dr. Whitley decided to take the keys to the clinic away from Miss Lively, stop her access to bank accounts, basically cut her off from any involvement with the medical clinic. And she became very angry about that. At his home, the evening before the fire, they argued, and Kathy Lively made the statement to Dr. Whitley, "I will kill you."
The night before the fire, there was a patient who needed a prescription. Well, that was the wrong milligram that she was taking. So I took the patient's file over to Doc's house, and I was telling Doc, "You're not giving her the right milligram." And we started arguing, and I said, "One day I'm going to kill you." We argued all the time. That was natural between us. I wasn't threatening Doctor. People gets mad and just says, "I'm going to kill you." I didn't know Doctor was going to be dead the next morning.
How quickly would you say investigators really focused on Kathy?
I'd say within the first few days.
Mm-hmm.
You find out that Kathy Lively said, "I will kill you," to Dr. Whitley. Everything was pointing towards Kathy.
They brought me up to the sheriff's office. They questioned me. They thought I had killed Doctor because he fired me. And I'm like, am I really hearing this? I hadn't been fired. No truth in none of that. And then they said that I was writing prescriptions for controlled substance. But that was wrong. Doctor agreed to everything that I called in or wrote. He signed off on everything I did.
Can you walk us through what their theory of the case was?
Law enforcement's theory was that Jason Lively, Kathy Lively's son, had gone into the house to intimidate or terrorize or try to convince Dr. Whitley to change the decisions he had made to cut Kathy off completely from the operation of the clinic. And that Jason Lively had started that fire, and the fire caused Dr. Whitley's death. They accused me of writing prescriptions for me and Jason. They said Jason killed Doctor because he was using prescription drugs or selling them. But if Doc was dead, nobody can write a prescription. It just didn't make no sense, none of it. I started working for Doc when Jason was 15 months old. Jason was around Doc his whole life as a doctor, friend, because Jason excelled in sports, wrestling, weightlifting. Doc would tell him what to eat and give him advice, tell him when he was messing up. Doctor and Jason was close.
Can you tell me a little bit about what Jason's reputation in this small town was?
He had a reputation for being very bold and that he was involved with drug use.
After his wrestling injury, he started taking pills. That was kind of hard on me to get him straightened out and back on track. But at the time of the doctor's death, he got a job in the coal mines, a steady job, and that was hard to come by in McDowell County at that time. A local person, Brian Sayers, said that early the morning of the fire, he had picked up Jason Lively and his friend Tommy Owens, and they wanted to be dropped off at Dr. Whitley's house.
And then they learned that Jason Lively went up to Sue Whitley's home on the mountain the day of the fire to tell her that Dr. Whitley was found dead. And while there, he stole Dr. Whitley's laptop computer and went out trying to sell it that day.
Sounds really bad.
Yes.
My name is Jason Lively, and I grew up in Yeager, West Virginia. That day, I was working at the coal mines. The electrician comes in, and he was like, "Look, man, cops are out there, and you're going to jail." When I got out, there was cops everywhere. And one of them that is arresting me is a childhood friend. He's putting the cuffs on me, and he was like, "Jason, man, they got you for murder." I said, "Who the hell did they kill?" He's like, "Doc, this was 2 months or whatever later." I was like, "Right now they just decided to try to blame somebody for that?" He was like, "Yeah." I couldn't believe it.
Jason Lively and Tommy Owens wanted separate trials, which was granted. Jason Lively was tried first.
And so what is the narrative that you presented at trial?
We decided to use evidence about the argument with Kathy the night before, and then Jason Lively stealing the computer. We also had what Brian Salyers told us about dropping him off at Dr. Whitley's house that morning, put together with the state fire marshal's opinion and report, added up to felony murder.
And so when you started calling witnesses, Brian Salyers is someone that you called in?
Yes, but Brian Salyers said that his statement was false, that he was coerced into making this statement about dropping Jason Lively and Tommy Owens off at Dr. Whitley's house that morning. He said that didn't happen.
So one of your star witnesses gets on the stand and completely changes their story.
Yes.
Does it make you, as the prosecutor, second-guess your case?
I didn't have any reason to doubt this case because of everything else that supported what Brian Salyers had said initially.
The law accused Jason of going up on the mountain the day Doc died and said Jason stole the laptop from the Coon Branch house, but Jason didn't steal it. While Doctor was staying at my house, he said to Jason, "You can take that laptop." Jason is not computer savvy, so he was just going to sell it. I think maybe 2 or 3 days before Doc died, Jason asked somebody, did they want to buy it?
After you've laid out your case, what did Jason's defense lawyers present to the court?
The defense argued you really couldn't rule out an accidental cause of the fire, and that there's a good possibility that Whitley could have started the fire himself because he smoked in bed. The bed was heavily damaged in the fire, but the experts concluded that could not have been caused from a cigarette.
So the theory of it being an accident that Doc started himself was ruled out?
Yes. I relied on the state fire marshal's report from Robbie Bailey and Tony Domingo that this was a deliberately set fire. Robbie Bailey believed there were 2 separate fires that had been set, which would not be consistent with an accidental fire. Mm-hmm. In addition, the report indicated that the sample from the bedroom floor showed the presence of the chemical toluene, an accelerant. They said this was commonly found in charcoal lighter fluid or gasoline.
It's very damning.
It is.
The night before the verdict, Jason said, "Mom, if I get convicted, don't cry." And when they come back with that verdict, guilty, Jason turned around and looked at me, and I had to stand there and do what he said. My heart just ripped out.
Jason is convicted of first-degree murder, which means it's a life sentence.
So how did you feel securing that victory?
I was very satisfied with it, very relieved. This time, Robbie Bailey and Tony Domingo gave contradictory testimony. Robbie Bailey testified that there were two separate fires.
Okay.
One in the bedroom and one in the living room. Mr. Domingo said, I believe there was only one fire, that the fire in the bedroom floor and living room ceiling had caused burning debris to fall down and catch the couch on fire.
Is that a major contradiction between your fire investigators?
It was, because I was going under the belief that they both thought there were two separate fires.
So Tommy's trial takes place after you've already secured a guilty verdict for Jason. What does the jury come back on with Tommy?
He was found not guilty.
Did that plant a seed of doubt with you?
It worried me a lot.
When I got to prison, they put me in Mount Olive Correctional Complex. We had a horrible warden, horrible, horrible people. It got to a point to where I had kicked and screamed and told them that I was innocent so many times that I was ashamed to say it. And then I got a letter from a childhood friend.
I met Jason at high school. Fast forward to 2005, and Jason had been arrested for Doc's murder. What I knew was Jason was convicted and Tommy wasn't. I never knew why, one was guilty and one wasn't. I just felt for Jason. I'm thinking, how is he doing? And I just wrote him. He wrote right back. He seemed so sweet and nice. He started calling, and then he started sending me transcripts of his trial. And I'm seeing this evidence in Jason's favor. And I knew instantly then there's no way Jason did that. There's no way.
Jason is serving out his prison sentence. Do you just put this case behind you at this point and move on?
Yes, but the last thing that a good prosecutor should want is to have someone wrongfully convicted. I had heard of the Todd Willingham case in Texas. He was convicted of setting a fire that caused the death of his young children. He said that he was innocent all along. And a group of nationally recognized fire investigation experts all concluded that there wasn't any evidence that it was a set fire. That case caused me to be really concerned about what really happened in the Jason Lively case, about what really started that fire. So I decided to try to find one of those experts.
We have covered a number of cases where people have been wrongfully convicted and the prosecutor's office refuses to look deeper into the case. Why did you feel comfortable re-examining your own work?
Prosecutor's job is not just to win a case or get a conviction. I always believed I wouldn't go wrong by doing the right thing. And as soon as I got the report, I recognized it was favorable to Jason Lively.
Can you walk me through the report?
He debunked the notion that there were 2 points of origin. He said the fire definitely started inside the floor, between the bedroom floor and the living room ceiling, and spread up to set the bed on fire, and burning debris fell to the lower floor to set the couch on fire. So he was strongly of the opinion that there was only one fire.
Only one point of origin for this fire?
Yes.
And it couldn't have even been someone pouring something on the floor upstairs. It had to start in between the ceiling and the floor.
In between, he believed it was an accidental fire caused by an electrical box under the bedroom floor.
What made him think it was electrical in nature?
The fire had smoldered for several hours, burning a wide area of the subfloor and wooden joists.
Those beams are completely gone.
It all pointed to the fire having started where the electrical wiring runs through.
So the original state fire marshal's report says that this fire was willful and malicious in nature, set in order to burn the structure and its contents. And here you have an expert that is nationally recognized saying that it is electrical in nature and accidental, and that there was only one point of origin, So if this report comes back and says no arson, what does that mean for a murder conviction?
If this was not deliberately set fire, then he's not guilty of murder. I was no longer the prosecuting attorney at that point, so I provided that report to the defense attorneys and said, you need to look at this. This is exculpatory evidence.
The first time I read Craig Byler's report, I'm seeing all of this information that's on his side that nobody had really talked about. This man has degrees from Harvard. I think one of the people that investigated to begin with had a few weeks training. And so I kind of thought, okay, we're going to break this wide open and he's going to get out soon.
It sounded so good. I was so happy. I was calling family. God has answered our prayers. Jason's coming home.
We was all hoping to get out. I believed it. With all my heart, I believed it.
I was called as a witness at the habeas corpus hearing. I had not been prepared. I didn't have a copy of the report.
No one prepped you before the hearing?
No one talked to me. And I thought they would have Dr. Byler there because I'm not an expert in fire investigations. But he wasn't there. So I testified that from my recollection at the time that it probably was an electrical fire, but it could have been something else. My understanding was that he didn't completely rule out arson.
Sid Bell didn't explain it the right way. He misinterpreted what the report was saying.
That was all of his state appeals. 12 years, thousands of dollars gone. Nobody left to turn to.
That was a horrible, horrible feeling. And you know what it's like to have your hopes dashed repeatedly? You get so mad and so helpless, can't do nothing. After a while, you just like, when's it gonna stop?
Things got ugly. Things got dark. Jason was very depressed. I was very depressed. Craig Byler's report didn't help him come home. So now what? I took a stand for Jason, and I was kind of scared too, because Jason was a murderer to everyone. Everyone in our small town, they listen to what they hear. So it was arson, it was murder. And I thought, how can I get anyone to believe in his innocence and help me fight? So I went online, shared a few transcripts, and talked about his case to try to get the public to understand, how wrong Jason was done. The Craig Byler report had so much evidence in Jason's favor. I started to get feedback from the public, and some opinions were turned around with what I was posting.
Billy supported me the whole time. She was always there, answered all my phone calls. She's loyal, strong, determined. She was calling newspapers, emailing lawyers. We were both working every day to get me out.
Us working on that together, Jason's charismatic. Yeah, I fell in love with him along the way.
Billy's everything that you could possibly want, man. She's perfect. It's nice to have somebody just be completely honest with.
I did not know the road ahead of me and how hard that was going to be by having feelings for him. It was painful. If I could have stopped it all, I would have. But it just happened. Jason's lawyer said that this is as far as he could take Jason's case because now it's going to go into the federal court. He said that we would have to get another attorney, which would be at least another $50,000 to start. And we didn't have any more money for attorneys. The other option was the Innocence Project.
Jason had been in prison more than a decade. What struck me was just how adamant he was that he didn't do this. He was also grateful that someone was finally listening. When we got the original habeas report, And when we saw the former prosecutor, Sid Bell's false testimony about the Byler report, we knew something wrong had happened here. Dr. Byler's report showed it's not murder because it wasn't arson. Dr. Byler hadn't spoken with anybody about this case since 2012. And when we read him what had been said at the hearing, he was horrified. He said, "I can't believe this. There's a person in prison right now?" Trying to correct this terrible mistake began with us reaching out to Sid Bell. So we drove out to West Virginia, and Dr. Byler met us there. This was incredibly awkward, because we had seen the transcript where Sid Bell had misstated what Dr. Byler had told him, and we assumed that that was intentional, that Sid Bell was preserving what he should have known was a wrongful conviction. We thought that he was the villain of this story.
So this big meeting happens. Was that your first time meeting Byler in person?
In person, yes. Dr. Byler explained that he is very strongly of the opinion that this was not arson, and that Lively's conviction should be set aside because it wasn't deliberately set fire by a human being.
So how did you feel finding out that there was no murder, that an innocent man was in prison, and that you were a part of it?
It's disturbing. I mean, you stay awake at night thinking about things like that. When they came to meet with me, I'm sure they thought I might have the attitude, this is my conviction and I want it upheld. But I acknowledged that we were wrong.
It was one of the most incredible moments of my career. And he wrote an affidavit that I don't think I'll ever see again. He admitted he had made a terrible mistake. We provided Sid Bell's affidavit to the Solicitor General's office in West Virginia. Dr. Glenn Jackson agrees 100% with Dr. Byler that this was accidental. He also adds additional findings. The finding about the toluene had been a false assumption all along. The sample that was found at the fire scene could not have come from gasoline, and it could not have come from charcoal starter fluid. However, if you burn wood, that creates toluene. Sid Bell admitted that that testimony that he had put on had been false.
We waited and waited and waited. There was no timeline. It's very lonely, very heartbreaking.
We gained hope, and then it's starting to fade again. I start thinking, they ain't gonna let me go home. It drives a man insane.
They kept him there, years and years. It's like kidnapping. And he had to defend himself, physically, on multiple occasions, from some truly vicious people. The Aryan Brotherhood had to hit out to kill him because he refused to join.
They always wanted Jason to have a tattoo to put their mark on him, and he never would. So they put a hit on him to take his life. And there had been other prisoners in there murdered.
And so Jason spent the majority of his time in prison in solitary confinement. It's absolutely torture, what he went through, especially after the state had developed evidence showing he was innocent.
Dear Emily, the time to act to stop this injustice is now. We have had knowledge of this compelling exculpatory evidence for 2 years. Further delay based on our failure to act would be immoral and unethical.
And so the court schedules a hearing. The lead up to that hearing is excruciating. He was very uncertain what would happen.
I spent 4,000 days in solitary confinement. Solitary is being locked down 24/7. They offered me a plea for time served. I could have got out right then, but I had to walk out and say that I did it. After you do 14 years and you're in solitary confinement, and somebody telling you that you can leave right now and be with your wife, and the one that you've been dying to be with for years, but you ain't gonna have no future, and you're gonna have to admit that you're wrong and say that I was guilty of murder. All that time, all that they took away from me being for nothing. I turned them down. Hey, hello.
Hi,
how you doing? Come on in.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, man.
Hi, Billy. I'm so happy to meet you. Can you tell me about this?
This is my cell, Mount Olive. This is where I stayed at. That right there, it's 11 years right there.
You spent 11 years in this
11 years in that right there.
So September of 2020, you have been in prison since 2005?
Yeah.
And you get called into this hearing with your lawyer, Andrew George. This is what kind of hearing?
For the judge to say if Jason could come home or not.
To get me out.
To vacate the sentence.
My sentence, yeah.
And Andrew told me, I don't know if Jason's coming home or not.
Uh-huh.
We were asking a judge to do something extraordinary at this hearing, which was to throw out a conviction. We didn't know whether or not the judge would do that.
I was told to pick Jason some clothes out, had them packed in a bag, and we had no idea what to expect.
Jason comes in his full prison outfit, and the judge started with the findings that led to Jason's conviction. It didn't look so great for us.
I was just trying to stay focused. And the whole time, when he's talking, I can't make out what he's saying, and it's all going so fast.
Then the judge went into the new findings of Dr. Byler and the state expert. He said that in light of this new evidence, no jury could have convicted you. There was no arson here. He affirmatively found that Jason was innocent.
I asked him if I could go home. He told me I could.
Hearing the judge say all these things, I couldn't process it. And then I look and see Jason standing up and they're taking the cuffs off, and that's when it all came together, like he's coming home.
I just ran up here and grabbed him, and I gave him the biggest hug and kiss. That was the first time I was able to really kiss him in 15 years. Oh, that was the best feeling I could ever have.
It's like it's the best feeling you could ever imagine. I mean, like, oh my God. It just exploded in a million pieces of happiness.
Who all was there that day?
Everybody.
Everybody.
We have a big family. Everyone showed up. It's almost like a dream, you know?
So what are your plans now?
Today?
Yes.
I'm going to go to my mom's house in each state.
I thought when Jason got released that day, he was going to be the same Jason that went in. But he still lives in torture.
You know, you think being exonerated and coming home and freedom and then everything's going to be okay after that. But it's not. You know, then you have these demons pop up and PTSD.
Yeah.
I think I'm strong. I know I am, but I swear it's hard. Just working every day. I mean, it's a struggle just to get out of the house.
You think you're going to have this happy ending, and then that's where almost the real work starts.
I have good doctors. They're trying, but we can't even afford them.
To have Jason have a decent life is to see doctors, counseling, therapy, medications.
It's hard for us.
The state has a moral obligation to make him whole as best as it can. Jason and Billy have now gotten married, and that's wonderful, but they have to make ends meet. So we have petitioned for Jason for compensation under a West Virginia statute that expressly provides for paying damages to wrongfully convicted people. Unfortunately, the state is moving to dismiss it, but we're not going to go away. We're going to take this as far as we possibly can.
They have admitted that they incarcerated an innocent man. What is the cost of 15 years of a person's life?
There's not a number. you could put on what they took from Jason to pay him back to fix what they did to him.
The state ain't done nothing for me. You know what I mean? Nothing.
Yeah.
They haven't even said I'm sorry. And if it wasn't for my family and her,
Yeah.
well, I couldn't have made it.
Oh, wow. It's just like he left it the night before he died. It's like the house is a metaphor for the situation. You know, this fire happened in 2005, and it is still sitting here, a burnt-out shell. It's eerie because 2 people lost their lives here. Doc Whitley died in this building, but Jason Lively's life was ruined by the fire that happened here because mistake after mistake was made. And when all these mistakes add up, what we're left with are shambles. Who's going to fix it? Who's going to put this back together? Who's going to make it right for Jason Lively and his family?
This president.
Frank Carson. This is the Manteca Police Department. We have a search warrant. The entire property is surrounded by officers. Come to the front door with your hands up.
We are in Stanislaus County, the agricultural center of the United States. These are almond orchards. How cool. Oh, that's so cool. And we're only like a mile outside of town.
Turlock and Stanislaus County is a heavily agriculture area, and that helps build the community.
Our town is probably one of the best all along the 99. You can kind of get everything you need here.
It's just a nice, quaint, peaceful place to live.
This is literally Americana with the tree-lined street that creates the little canopy. And everything's orderly. Like, I have to imagine this is a really good, like, trick-or-treating town. I mean, it's beautiful here, but there's a problem, and it is drugs. And so we see a lot of folks like this really struggling, just walking up and down the main drag. That's not fun.
Specifically in Turlock, there's a lot of heroin and meth. We see it in the people that come to try to sell stuff to us. They're trying to sell us stolen stuff, or they're, sometimes I think they're stealing from us too.
The methamphetamine epidemic and the crimes that are associated with it are you name it, everything's open. It's open game. It's the Wild West out here.
Well, and the police presence is huge. We have seen so much law enforcement, just even in like a 5-block radius. The very things that make this a successful agricultural community, the way they can send out food everywhere in America, it's the same reason this has become a drug hub. And in this case, drugs play a huge part. In 2012, a young man named Corey Kaufman went missing, and a huge investigation was launched. And it turned into one of the longest, most expensive trials, not only in this county's history, but in the state of California.
I'm Kevin Pickett. I'm Corey's stepfather. I've had him since he was a year old, and I've grown to love him more than life itself. He loved life. You could hear him singing in the shower. He'd come out of the bathroom, with a towel on, he'd slide across the floor like Tom Cruise in that movie. He's always been a great kid. But he just got with the wrong people in this town. And I think a lot of things happened to him because of this town. Corey had a problem with meth, and he started hanging around this man named Mike Cooley. Mike was in prison for a long time, which I didn't like. And I could feel it in my bones that the things that Mike did with him wasn't always great. Mike was stealing stuff, tools, antiques, and other things, for meth. That day, my son got up and did his thing and didn't come home that night. I said, something's wrong. He would have called me at least. And that's when I called the cops, just trying to find my son. That's all I care about.
Kevin, I'm Hillary. How are you?
Glad to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you.
I want to hear all about Corey from you.
That's Corey, his mom.
He's a handsome kid.
Yeah, he was. He was big, blue-eyed, blonde-haired. His laugh was just one of a kind. This is what we call his Billy Bob look.
His Billy Bob look?
Yeah, cowboy.
Wait, was he into cowboying?
He loved cowboy. Here he is before he came up missing. Pretty close.
So what's the last time that you see Corey?
I seen him going down the road. He was going to take a wheelbarrow back that he had borrowed. He didn't come home the next day. So I went to Mike Cooley's, trying to find Corey, and his bike was there.
So your son's bike is still sitting at Mike Cooley's house?
Yep. Mike said, Corey's not here. I said, well, where is he at? He said, well, I told him not to go over that property, but I think he went over there anyway. I said, what property? He said, over there behind his house. That's where the lawyer, Frank Carson's property was, that Mike and Corey were supposedly stealing stuff from.
So what do you do after that?
I went to Frank Carson's property. Frank's stepdaughter was there. Frank, he was on the phone with his stepdaughter, and I talked about going on the property and just looking to see if there's evidence of my son being over there somehow. And she tried to shut the door in my face, and I put my foot inside the door. Everybody would not talk to me. I was just answering questions and concerned about certain things. Why would you do that?
Do you call law enforcement?
Yep.
And what did they say to you?
That I'd have to wait a certain amount of time before I could place a missing person report. So we waited 72 hours, I believe, and that's when I reported him missing.
What do you do after that?
I started making up flyers.
Is this one of them? How many of these do you think you passed out?
1,000.
Really?
Or more. But nothing else was being done. And then the highway patrolman next door to my house, talked to him about what can I do to get something going on about my son's case. I told him that my son, he ended up on a property over at Frank Carson's house. When I mentioned Frank Carson's name, and that's when it really started escalating into this big investigation.
Corey Kaufman was missing, and no one heard about it. It was just another poor, lost, drug-addicted soul, and the cops didn't care particularly. No one was involved. Nothing happened. And it wasn't until they looked at Frank Carson that all of a sudden people heard about Corey Kaufman. My name is Doug Maynor. I've been a lawyer for 40 years, including 22 with the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office. And I watched Frank in action when I was a prosecutor and he was a defense attorney for many, many years. There's a million Frank Carson stories, but all the things he's done in the courthouse, he'd be in the grill of these cops, these DAs, and saying, your case is bad. He'll be calling insulting names. He'll accuse them of sexual deviancy, of dishonesty. I mean, he made people, viscerally, personally angry. If Frank wasn't the suspect, no one would have heard about Corey Kaufman. We wouldn't be here today. Birgit Flatiger is the elected district attorney of Stanislaus County, and she's completely in charge of something like 35 attorneys in a budget of untold millions of dollars. And she felt offended by the things that Frank did to her attorney. She felt protective of them, and she said, he's a bad man. So everybody paid attention when Frank's name came up.
Once you get them to take the missing person case seriously, the one person that put your son at Frank Carson's is Mike Cooley.
Exactly. If my son did go over there, it's because of Mike Cooley, because they was apparently thieving antiques and property from them.
Michael Cooley is a local thug. If you're from Turlock and you're up to shenanigans or, methamphetamine type of activities, you're going to know Mike Cooley. I'm Malvino. I work for the Sheriff's Department for the last 28 years. Mike has been in this area since the beginning of my career, robbing, stealing, to get high kind of stuff. He did carry some weight because he's a pretty muscular guy, and because of his connections on the streets, he was well regarded with the inmate population.
Did they look at Michael Cooley?
Yeah, and they said they talked to him, and they said, well, he was clean.
Uh-huh.
And then I saw that interview with Turlock Journal.
Corey was over there earlier that day, and we was in my backyard playing horseshoes, and there was some pipe on the other side of the fence on Frank's property, and Corey seen it. He wanted to go over there and get it. I told him that there was some people over there that we wasn't going to go do it, and he gave me his word he wasn't going to go do it. He said he was going to go somewhere else and try to make money. Apparently he lied to me. He went over that fence, and he never came back.
We had a house in Turlock. There was a lot of drug activity in the neighborhood, and they were stealing from us, and we lost a lot of stuff. My name is Georgia DiFilippo. My husband is Frank Carson. By the early 2000s, we had a booming law business. And we had kind of this side hustle of selling antiques, and we'd go to swap meets and do things on weekends that were not law related. I had a vegetable garden over there, and Frank loved old cars, and we loved to collect antiques. It just was a good life. And then along about 2011, we were at a swap meet, and we saw a man. He was selling some of our stuff. Frank recognized it, and he just flipped. So we went home, and that's when we discovered the fence had been cut and the containers were open. Everything had been gone through. We made a couple reports to the police, but the cops told me, that we have to catch them in the act. And then we decided to put barbed wire on top of the fences, and we bought a motion detector. But thieves kept coming back. That's when Mike Cooley lived in the house on the other side of the fence, and he just started stealing everything.
When I first met Frank, he was over our house to see if we had any of his stolen property. He threatened. He kicked my door in, he kicked the gate in. He didn't have no respect for nothing. And he said, if I ever catch you or any of your friends in my backyard, and he goes, especially you, Mr. Cooley, he goes, I will kill you.
District Attorney and investigators interviewed Mr. Cooley and came up with a theory that Corey Kaufman was one of the thieves, and Frank caught him and killed him. Now, no one knows he's dead. They just know he's not around Turlock anymore. And it's very hard to prosecute a no-body homicide. So the cops were very aggressive in developing evidence.
Hi, honey, it's me.
Hi, Frank. I was wondering if you wanted to get a taco or something.
Traditionally, law enforcement does not use wiretaps to investigate their cases, except in very rare and limited circumstances. But in this case, wiretaps were used a lot.
Hi, honey, I'm sorry to bother you.
What's up?
The cops have come with dogs, I guess body-sniffing dogs, and they searched, they cut all the locks on all the containers.
Did they find any bodies?
No. Hell no. There isn't any.
Are they done with us then, or?
No, I don't think they're done with us by a long shot.
The district attorney's office, headed by Birgit Flatiger, created a task force. I've never seen it in 30 years in this county where the district attorney's office would be the lead investigative agency in a case.
We were working at the office, and an officer came in from the Turlock Police Department, and he said, I had some questions regarding the disappearance of Corey Kaufman. And Frank said, well, if you have any questions, I want you to put them in writing. And, the officer tried to ask a few, and he said, well, I just need to know. Frank would just say, put them in writing, put them in writing. So he left. It's 7 o'clock. We're getting ready to leave for the night. And I look up and these three guys had just walked into our office. Investigator Bunch from the district attorney's office, and he was accompanied by a couple of detectives.
Hey, Frank. Mr. Carson.
How you doing?
You have a warrant for my arrest or anything? No,
Get out.
I don't.
And they said, "Oh, Frank, we'd like to ask you some questions."
Hey, Georgia.
Come here.
We're here to talk to you about a potential murder. You're a person of interest.
Get out.
You need to
Get out. Get out.
It was upsetting. They wouldn't go. They just stood there by the door. Frank said, "Leave" a lot of times.
We'd really like to find Corey's father.
Get out.
Bunch was the one that did the talking. We just have a few questions. Why won't you answer our questions? Button pushing, you know?
You know, Georgia, this thing's going to be all bad.
I'm ready. So Frank starts saying, "He's threatened my wife."
Get out.
Are you being aggressive, Mr.
Get out.
Carson? This isn't going to go away.
Get out.
And it went on.
It's not going to work this time, Mr. Carson.
Finally, they left. Kirk Bunch, who was an investigator for the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, and Frank, they knew each other. Kirk just hated Frank.
Frank had a long and pretty controversial career here in Stanislaus County because he was the guy defending the underdogs. But that also made him the nemesis of law enforcement who he'd battle in the courtroom.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Martha. How are you?
It's so nice to meet you.
I'd love to ask you about what your relationship was with Frank Carson predating this case.
Frank and I worked together in the public defender's office.
Did you and Frank have similar reputations?
No, I don't think so. I wasn't as direct as Frank is.
Was he a good yeller?
Oh, he yelled. He was a great yeller. But mostly the problem was he won.
And is that what pissed people off?
And that's what really irritated the district attorney's office, that he would call them names, insult them in every turn, and then beat them.
Corey Kaufman goes missing. Your friend and colleague, Frank Carson, is very quickly pointed at. What was your understanding of who was directing people in Frank's direction?
My understanding from the get-go was that Kirk Bunch, a district attorney investigator, was the person driving the train.
On the witness stand, when the cops got away from the cold hard facts and started shading things, Frank was very effective in pointing that out. Frank had some very intense, very hardcore personal attacks on Kirk Bunch and in effect accused him of being unhinged, unstable, and lying and fabricating evidence. So you've got the biggest haters in town in charge of Frank's investigation. A lot of criminal defendants, they got the message and they knew that if I had some bad information on Carson, I could use it to get out from a case.
Did you tell him that Mr. Carson had asked you to make sure the stuff stopped over there?
I might have known.
Robert Woody is from that drug-using community in Turlock, and he worked as a janitor for the Atwell brothers, the owners of Pop and Cork liquor store, known to us as Bobby and Dee. They knew Frank because Frank had represented Bobby in a bar licensing issue a few years earlier.
Okay.
And now the theory was that the Atwells were there to provide security for Frank Carson on his property. And Corey Kaufman came onto the property, and that the Atwells captured him, struggled with him, and shot him.
Did you tell him that they did a good job, they're never going to find that body? Just telling you what we're being told.
Okay. I say a lot of to me, but...
So they're saying that Woody helped the Atwells kill Corey Kaufman.
Yes, but he denied any involvement.
But they kept looking for evidence and now focused on the two Atwell brothers who ran the Pop and Cork liquor store.
Mr. Bunchke came to talk to me at the store. We was in the back room and he asked me questions. Just Frank. And after that, day and night, he parked his car outside across the street, taking pictures in the store. They search our house, they search our stores. They harass us all the time here.
I say you bugging us too much every day. We told you how much we know. We don't know anything.
Hey, D, it's a murder investigation that we're investigating.
I don't care. I don't know anything.
The more people you have, the more chances there are that someone's going to start talking. So they started to wiretap everybody who were friends of the Atwalls.
The Poppin Court, it had a back room, and it was a place where law enforcement would hang out. They could go into the back room, have a couple of beers, and when the Atwalls, who were being harassed in their minds by Kirk Bunch, they called their law enforcement friends to find out what they could do about it.
I'm fucking paranoid now. I don't want somebody put underneath my car tracking anything.
Yeah, just get a mirror. You can buy one with a mirror with the glass.
Uh-huh.
And you can look under there, brother.
Show me, you know how to do it?
Yeah. Don't stress. Just relax.
They developed a lot of incidental evidence on officers Walter Wells, Scott McFarland, and Kenton R.
So how does Frank fall into that?
Basically, the idea was that Frank had ordered the Atwalls to kill whoever came onto his property. From the very beginning, they were looking at Frank.
For murder?
For murder, right.
Without a body?
Without a body.
"26-year-old Corey Kaufman's body was found by hunters in the Stanislaus National Forest."
Investigators came knocking on the door. They told me they had found Corey's body. Remains. It hit me hard. Thought about suicide, about a lot of things at that time, and it hurt me bad.
I was told he got shot.
Stabbed. Shot. When he jumped over that fence, that was his last jump.
Oh, he was trying to break in?
Oh, he came over there to steal more off the property.
Oh, he was doing that to your lawyer?
Mm-hmm. To my lawyer, Frank Carson.
Robert Woody told his girlfriend that he was part of killing Corey Kaufman.
Really?
Yeah. He was arrested. He was interrogated for hours and hours and hours.
Listen to this. Last jump.
Oh, he was trying to break in?
So the lawyer was very frustrated that the police weren't doing their job.
Yes.
And so that's why he summoned you guys.
Where was Bobby at?
It was in Frank's backyard.
Now, with the body and Woody's testimony, Birgit Flatter felt that she had all the ammunition she needed to get a conviction.
Please exit the residence with your hands up.
Turn around! Turn around!
Am I under arrest?
The investigating officers are going to explain everything to you, okay?
Stop resisting. You don't have to handcuff me.
This has been a long 3-year investigation into the death and homicide of Corey Kaufman. The task force has worked together since 2012 in order to see that justice is served, culminating in today's arrests and execution of search warrants.
Police department, search warrant!
Carson is described as the ringleader, enlisting henchmen and bringing associates and 3 current and former CHP officers into the scheme.
They attacked my house from all angles, even going over the backyard fences. This vehicle came around the corner with screeching tires, pointing their gun at me.
They arrested 3 cops, the 2 Atwalls who ran the liquor store.
They took me from the bed, half naked, put handcuffs on me, arrested me.
Come here.
They arrested Frank's wife, his daughter.
I got the full treatment and the red striped suit and a little cavity search, and off I go to BMAX, maximum security.
It took a lot of work, it took a lot of time, and it has finally come together.
I couldn't believe it when it happened. This is the arrest warrant.
This entire thing?
Yes. It's 324 pages.
How did you get involved in this case?
The Atwalls were arrested on Friday, and on Saturday, I became Bobby's attorney.
Day 1 of the preliminary hearing, the state presented text messages and a wiretap on Georgia and her daughter.
They had subpoenaed the text messages, discussions between Chrissy and Georgia about security at the property.
Forensic analyst told the court he combed through more than 10,000 text messages from a backup file on a laptop belonging to Carson's stepdaughter, Christina DeFilippo. The prosecutors insist show the family was upset about the thefts and took measures into their own hands.
A prosecutor is Marlisa Ferreira. She starts out the prelim with the text messages where I ask Christy to go out into the field and see if anybody's there,
In one of the messages, Carson's wife, Georgia DeFilippo, writes her daughter, quote, "Don't suppose you want to dress in black and slip out to see if we're being robbed blind tonight." In another, she writes, quote, "Frank is flipping out. He'll be packing a gun."
Christine said, "I'm getting freaked out." And I said, "Don't worry, Frank's coming down later." And then I just kind of added, "and he's got his gun." I just thought it would make Christy feel better, but it turned out to be a pretty big deal.
What are you doing up so early? Oh, I broke the window.
Christine and I had a phone conversation one day. She was being woken up about 7:30 in the morning by two dueling lawnmowers next door. And she pounded on the window and it broke, and she just was in tears.
You were lawn mowing. I broke it. Why? Are they still mowing the damn lawn? Yeah, they're still mowing. Do you want me to come and shoot them?
They tried to use that as proof that Georgia was willing to kill.
That's insane.
It was insane.
They can take such innocent things out of context, and then suddenly they make it into something that is not what you intended.
The state's theory was that the Atwell brothers killed Corey Kaufman. Had the Atwell brothers ever been accused of a violent crime or murder before?
No. The Atwells didn't have any kind of a record.
So then what did the prosecution present?
Their theory was that Dee Atwell shot Corey Kaufman on Frank's property. Then Dee Atwell and Bobby Atwell and Robert Woody loaded Corey Kaufman's body into a truck and took it to a field next to the popping court in the middle of Turlock, where they buried it for a month and then unburied it and moved it to up in the mountains.
So that theory that the state presented is a minefield of forensic evidence.
He says Dee was ahead of him. Dee jumps into the fight. He says he turns away and here's a gunshot. Boom.
The state's claim that he was beat and shot. There would have been blood on Frank's property.
Right, there would have been blood on their property. There would have been some evidence of Corey's presence. There was nothing there. There would have been something at the popping court.
Like a cadaver dog would have picked up on something.
A cadaver dog. And they used dogs. They brought dogs in everywhere.
Right here is where he says that he believes he started digging the hole.
They took soil samples. They dug it up. And in fact, you can see where they claim the body was. There's a pipe running through it that's only 6 inches below the ground surface. So there's no way for a body to be in that space.
So is there any forensic evidence in Frank's backyard?
There's no forensic evidence in Frank's yard. There's no forensic evidence in the popping court yard. There was no DNA. There was no ballistics. There was nothing.
How in the world did this prelim, that did not include any forensic evidence or physical evidence, how was this drawn out over 18 months?
You really had to be there.
Walter Wells faces a murder charge. Scott McFarland and Eduardo Quintanar Jr. face conspiracy and accessory charges.
I did wonder how they landed on Walter Wells out of all the officers that hung out at the popping court for murder.
They never connected Walter with Frank in any way. But Walter Wells was alleged to have had Corey Kaufman's phone and therefore must have had something to do with burying him.
Corey Kaufman's cell phone piece of it is very confusing. Can you tell me about this cell phone expert?
The cell phone expert, he spent hours and hours and hours going over these phone records of all the defendants.
Okay.
Looking for where everybody's cell phones were at various times on the timeline. Mm-hmm. So Walter Wells' phone was pinging off a cell tower in the same vicinity as Corey Kaufman's phone in the 2 weeks after Corey's disappearance, where his phone was still alive.
They relied on cell phone evidence to link me to the murder of Corey Kaufman, but I found out that the cell phone expert's testimony was inherently misleading.
They said that he was carrying around the dead guy's phone in his pocket to throw the cops off, and the evidence of that is it pinged different towers in Turlock. Well, Turlock is a small town, and there are not that many cell towers there, and anybody who lives in Turlock who moves around is going to have their cell phone ping off the same towers that Wells's phone pinged off.
Walter was also patrolling that area on duty, so there's no surprise that Corey's phone was in the same sector as Walter's phone.
But a big deal was made of this.
Exactly.
If you're really going to kill this guy, you're going to walk around with his phone in your pocket? You know, who does that? But that was an example of the depths that the prosecution task force would go to convict Frank Carson. The preliminary hearing against Frank Carson was one for the books. It was, I think, the longest in the history of California, a year and a half or so.
During the prelim, I was just waiting for that smoking gun. What is it exactly that we did wrong? And at no time during the whole prelim did they establish that.
They had, 150 witnesses to develop as much evidence as they could. Witnesses, jailhouse informants, wiretaps, and they kept throwing that crap up against the wall until something sticks. And that's why the prelim, it took so long. Meanwhile, Frank and the other defendants, they're locked up in jail and their lives are falling apart. It took a toll on Frank and his health started to suffer. The way they had him housed in the jail, they kept it extra cold and the lights don't go off. Well, how do you sleep at night when you're freezing and the lights don't go off and you're facing the death penalty?
Being in jail was horrible. It was extremely difficult for me to get up many days, just find a willingness to want to push through.
There was a lot of screaming at night. It was cold, it was damp, sewage would leak through there.
You want to kill yourself in there, you want to just commit a suicide. It's just like small room, small door, they only come, open the lock, only give you food, and then they lock back. That was like a nightmare.
The longevity of this trial feels very much like that saying, like, the cruelty is the point.
Exactly.
You know, the longer you can make it last, the longer Frank is locked up in county jail. Did it feel that way to you guys?
They weren't in any hurry to finish the preliminary hearing. They were pushing to get every defendant to turn on Frank.
They were waiting for us to turn on each other, that one person was going to rat the other person out.
They were trying to make my life as miserable as possible while I was in jail so that I would come forward with information about the Outlaw brothers and Frank Carson.
They just want Frank Carson, just say Frank Carson, just say Frank Carson. In the courthouse, Mr. Bunch always signal us. He always touches his phone. Call me. Go home today, just say Frank did it.
Do any of the defendants ever turn on Frank?
No. In fact, Frank at one point said he'd plead guilty to get them off.
There was a moment where Frank Carson was extremely upset, and he told us that he would be willing to just take the blame, fall on the sword for everyone.
And one time I remember Frank say, you know what, boys, you have a life to live. You know, I should take a deal and I'll go to prison, you guys go live your life.
We all agreed. We were not going to allow him to confess to something that he didn't do.
We told him, Frank, no, don't. We're not going to do anything like that. We're just going to fight.
The preliminary hearing goes and goes and goes, and we're getting new information all the time, and it's dribbling in. So we felt the district attorney was withholding discovery.
At what point is the district attorney's office supposed to turn over everything they have to you guys?
We should have had all of that the day we started. We didn't. About 14 months into it, all of a sudden, Marlisa Ferreira announced to the court that there were 164 tapes that we didn't know existed.
Okay.
Marlisa told that judge the day before that she didn't have anything else. And then the next day she comes in with these big stacks of all these interviews and stuff. And the judge looked at her and said, "What's that?"
Miss Ferreira rolls into court one day and she says, "Oh yeah, I've got 70 discs of evidence that I just never got around to giving to you."
And that's when the judge said no, and she was angry because this is a violation.
And finally, this judge decided that the evidence of the district attorney's malfeasance was so strong that she had to let Frank and the other defendants out of custody.
It was wonderful. It was like a Christmas present.
When we finally heard that she was going to let us go home, I just started crying. Everybody just in the courthouse just break down. We just like all crying.
First thing you want to do.
Have dinner with my wife.
Yeah.
You know, after all the delays in discovery, after all the fabricated evidence, even after all that, the judge found that the case should go forward to trial. I was shocked.
Something that never should have started. We can't seem to get to the end. Bobby and Dee and Frank are going to trial on murder charges. The penalty for conviction of which is life without parole.
The state has all of this weird circumstantial stuff, but they have a witness.
Right.
That they're excited to present. Tell me about that.
Robert Woody is the star witness because he is claiming that he was with the Atwalls when they had the confrontation with Corey Kaufman, but there's a problem with Robert Woody as a witness.
I don't know who killed him, okay?
The first time he was interrogated, he denied any involvement.
You don't understand the magnitude.
People get convicted, and they get convicted of first-degree murder, and they spend the rest of their life in prison.
They intimidated him. They subjected him to a really long interview.
Hey, we're going to take a break. You need to go to the bathroom?
Then there's a 20-minute bathroom break, and he comes back, and he changes the story.
I took you to the bathroom, right? Okay, and you made a statement to us.
You said you were there. You said Bobby was there. You said Daljeet was there. Okay, and you said that Bobby was the main aggressor.
Is that fair to say in so many words? Yes. Okay, why don't you come out? Pull your chair.
They told Woody that you have two choices. You can be facing the death penalty, or you can be a witness and get out from under all of this.
Robert, we're here for you. Seriously, I'm not going to let you down. Robert, I'm not going to let you down.
Woody knew that the more information he gave on Carson, the better the deal he would get.
He was arrested, and for the next year plus, there are various other interviews where Robert's trying to figure out what he's supposed to say.
It's the details that we can corroborate that make the entire the thing make sense.
The only problem is Woody didn't know what to say. And they fed him information by giving him suggestive or leading questions.
So is the information true that we got is that they buried Corey's body at the business initially, in the back?
They say, what happened to the body? And didn't you bury the body at the popping court? I mean, they just suggest the whole everything.
No, they didn't bury the body in the back.
But you guys didn't go to the mountains that night. And I'm telling you that because the cell phones don't show anybody driving up to the mountains that night.
You guys went to the store first.
Robert's trying to figure out what he's supposed to say, and it is very clear.
Right.
In fact, the whole...
You walked up the hill?
Right.
I walked up the hill.
The whole scenario, then comes the worst part. He has another interview on November 26th.
What happened when Carson came up?
Handed him gun.
D-handed who?
Carson.
Carson the gun?
Yeah.
He says that Frank was present with a gun, and that Walter Wells pulled up in a police car, all of which not only is not true, but it can't be true, because everybody knows where Walter Wells was. He was at his father's funeral.
Even his attorney, they pulled it back. They said, well, Woody was telling the truth about these things, but when he said that Carson had a gun in his hand, yeah, okay, he made that up. And the DA still stuck with him.
Woody tells a lot of differing stories about what happened with the case, what happened with Corey Kaufman's body.
Right.
Can a judge step in and be like, this is ridiculous?
Yes, but she didn't.
The DA went with Robert Woody with a parade of jailhouse informants that they dangled deals in front of. They had, 150 witnesses? None of them had Frank say the magic words, go kill him for me. None of them had Frank with the gun in his hand. None of them had Frank cutting the body up or destroying it. None of them had Frank doing anything except being Frank.
We were sitting there and the jury came in. They handed their decision to the judge and she looked at it and it was Frank Carson was not guilty, Bobby was not guilty, Dee was not guilty. It was wonderful.
Champagne and a taste of vindication for this Modesto attorney. Congratulations. The congratulations for Frank Carson in the form of one hug after another. What are the emotions that you're feeling right now?
Relief and happy.
Here it is. I haven't been in here since we were arrested. It's been 7 years.
I'm sure while you were living here, this was kind of a grown-up playland.
It was fun.
It's like an American picker's dream.
We had lost so much. It's just sad. I do believe in the justice system still, and the jury did the right thing, and they listened to us. But we shouldn't have been in that position in the first place.
Carson says prosecutors need to search for Kaufman's true killers for justice to prevail.
The sooner that they replace the investigators in this case, the sooner they're going to find, hopefully, who perpetrated it.
Tell me who's responsible for my son's murder. If it's not these people, and you all said dead sure they were, tell me who is. Because one day I will find out.
This case was not about justice for Corey Kaufman. It was to get Frank Carson. And in the process, I was just collateral damage. I lost so much time away from my daughter and my family. I lost my career. I lost my retirement. I lost my home.
It's a nightmare. When I come home, my little daughter, she doesn't remember me. I'm never going to be the same person. My brother, he never going to be the same person. I can't believe it, what they did to us.
We felt like we were the victims of a vindictive prosecution by a district attorney's office that didn't want to deal with a defense attorney who was a fighter for justice.
Frank financially was gutted. His law practice is in shambles, and his body suffered. He was injured from being in the jail for so long. After a while, his kidneys started to fail. Yeah, you can say, well, he was acquitted and he walked. He lost.
Frank was really never the same. His health continued to decline, and he died in August of 2020.
I'm so sorry. What do you want people to know about this case?
What I really want is for this to never happen again. One person like Birgit Flatiger has all the power to take your life away with no evidence to do so.
In a small town like this, the power of the district attorney's office to upend lives is frightening. Frank Carson spent his career calling out abuse of power from the district attorney's office, and in the end, they proved him right.
Hey! Please get someone to my office.
What's going on?
Please, my girlfriend, I think she just shot herself in blood everywhere, please.
She what?
She shot herself.
Are you in the same room with her?
Yeah, the whole room.
Okay. Does it look like she's breathing at all?
No.
No? Where's the gun at?
Right next to her. Right next to her.
St. Augustine is apparently the oldest town in America. There's clearly a Spanish influence here. It's got really similar vibes to Miami and to New Orleans. It just feels like you're visiting a really cool, historic small town.
My family's lived in St. Augustine since 1595. A lot of families in St. Augustine that have been here a long time, and a lot of people related to one another.
Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows what's going on. We are all connected, and word does travel.
Mini golf, man. Not a vacation town unless you've got mini golf. The beach is amazing. You have all the fun stuff without having to deal with the crime of the big city.
Live from Studio 5, this is First Coast Connect on 89.9. First this morning, a controversial investigation in St. Augustine. It centers around the 2010 death of Michelle O'Connell. This is a long-running drama that has divided the nation's oldest city and the law enforcement community there.
So on the surface, there's this beautiful, bright, shiny little town. How do you go from this fairy tale life to a tragedy like Michelle O'Connell's death?
Ma'am, I need you to calm down.
Sir, listen, hang on. Here, let me tell you the truth. I'm Deputy Banks with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. I work with y'all. Get someone here now.
Okay, what's going on there?
My girlfriend just shot herself.
Is she still breathing?
No, there's blood coming out of everywhere. Please, call dispatch on TAC 2. Get them here now.
My name is Deborah Maynard. On September 2nd, 2010, I was a deputy sheriff with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office. There was a call on the radio that got all of our attention. Signal 18, which was shots fired.
Can you walk out to the front
door?
door?
I'm not leaving.
Okay.
I'm not. No, please get someone in.
Your friends are on the way.
We heard a badge number come out. We knew it was another deputy involved. Took off down US 1 South. My sergeant beats me in, and the corporal and I are in the doorway at the same time. And another deputy was there. We were first on scene. I remember the front door being opened and one light on outside. Walked in the door. First thing I saw on the floor was the legs of a female. I saw little black ballerina shoes, a pair of jeans.
Deputy Banks was just to her right side, kind of holding on to her. Michelle O'Connell appeared to have some type of serious injury, which I assumed to be a gunshot wound to the head or face.
My name's Chrissy O'Connell, and I am Michelle O'Connell's sister. We come from a large family, 6 siblings. Michelle was the baby. Michelle's spirit was just wild. She said what she felt, but she also cared about people at the same time. When she was little, she was very independent. But she brought a lot of joy into our life because she was, just a cutie pie. She was so adorable.
I'm on my way to meet with Michelle O'Connell's older sister, Chrissy. She can shed light on who Michelle was, what she was going through. What's amazing about the O'Connell family is that they've never given up this fight. It has been over 10 years, and they are still demanding justice for their little sister. The O'Connell family is not going to bend to the narrative that was presented to this community.
Michelle meant so much to our family, when she was taken. I cry for my niece. She looks a lot like her, and she had that little Spitfire in her, and so I see a lot of Michelle in her daughter.
That seems to be the word that a lot of people use for Michelle, that she was like feisty, the Spitfire.
Oh, yeah. A baby of 6 kids, so you had to fight, to be heard and seen, and she was. Michelle was a single mother, and she just loved her daughter more than anything. When Alexis was about 3.5, Michelle met Jeremy Banks, the deputy sheriff. She met him through our family. My mom and brother worked at the sheriff's office.
My mom, Patty, was a file clerk, and my brother, he was a sheriff's deputy working in law enforcement. There was definitely a sense of pride, and there was a sense of we're part of the family.
Everybody hug.
I met Michelle at
Treaty Park. Jeremy was in his uniform. He was pushing her on a swing, and I just felt like, oh my gosh, here's someone that's going to take good care of her. All right.
Before she met Jeremy, had she ever lived with anybody before?
Jeremy was the first person she ever moved in with.
Yeah.
And it was a big step for Michelle.
Bye-bye.
You want me to go bye-bye?
No.
No.
When we showed up on scene, I walked into the room. Jeremy was crouched, holding the house phone in his hand, just looking. The gun was Jeremy's duty weapon, and the tactical light on top of the gun was on.
Fire rescue would be there shortly, and the firearm would have to be moved for them to work on her.
So quickly, before we moved anything, including that gun, another deputy took some photos.
Once he took the photographs, I then took the firearm and placed it in the bathroom on the counter.
My sergeant said, "Get Jeremy out of here." I get Jeremy outside, and he starts pacing like a wild animal. He kept going, "Argh!" He went over to the front of my sergeant's car with double fist and hit it so hard he put dents in the hood. Fire rescue is in control of the scene now. They called that she had died. My sergeant and lieutenant come out. They say, okay, we need to secure the scene. No one else in.
We were standing out front discussing it, and from what I understood, that it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
My lieutenant said, we need you to go make family notifications.
I get the call. One of my brothers said, come now. And I flew over to my mom's house, and there were about 6 or 7 deputies with their lights on. And I got out of the car. I said to one of the deputies, just tell me, who is it? He said, it's your sister, Michelle. And I just collapsed. The deputy said, it appears Michelle has died by active suicide. And I thought, no, she didn't. This isn't a suicide. Michelle's story. You got it wrong.
Tell me what was going on that night before you got the call.
Michelle was at a concert with some of my brothers and Jeremy. I was watching her daughter. She said, you keep her for tonight and I'm coming to get her from you.
Michelle offered me a ticket to join her and Jeremy in their seats at the concert. Michelle was happy and dancing, and I was hugging her and taking some selfies. Jeremy was quiet, and I could just read his body language. Something was bothering him. One point in the concert, she shared that she was starting a new position at work tomorrow. That was something that she was extremely excited about and proud of. After we left the concert, we were parting ways, and Michelle and Jeremy were heading home for the night.
When I was babysitting Alexis, I got some texts from Michelle, but they were not like her regular texts.
Can you walk me through what those were?
Yeah. She said something along the lines of like, promise me one thing. Promise me Alexis will be loved. And I'm like, what? Promise you what?
Depending on who's looking at them, Michelle's text messages can be seen as alarming.
Then I later got a text that said, I'll be there soon. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, something happened. She's going to tell me about it later. But then she never came. And now, here are deputies, not even detectives, telling me that my sister died of a suicide.
2465.
She had texted me, is Alexis okay? I'm on my way. I was trying to show anyone that would listen to me Michelle's story, but we were not listened to.
My name's Clu Wright. I'm a private investigator here in the state of Florida. The night Michelle O'Connell died, Detective Hines interviewed Jeremy Banks at the scene in the back of a patrol car.
Tell me about tonight.
We were at the concert. We argued a little bit, but nothing terrible.
After the concert, about 10:30, they got in a car and drove back home.
Then in the car, we had decided that we were gonna break up. She was gonna move out.
They arrived at Jeremy's house about 10:45, 10:55 p.m. Jeremy said that Michelle was inside the house packing her clothes to move out of Jeremy's house.
The last thing I said to her, I told her I loved her. I said, please don't do anything stupid. I do love you.
Don't do anything stupid. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just typical breakup stuff. People say things like, kill myself or things like that.
Has this ever been something that she's said she would do? Have there been threats?
About a month ago, we were fighting. I can't tell you exactly what she said, but the words were, sometimes you just make me want to kill myself.
Jeremy also said that he said, well, can I have one last kiss? And Michelle told him, no, you cannot have a last kiss. After that, he left to go sit on his motorcycle out in the garage.
I heard it pop, and I knew exactly what it was. Just instinct. I just said, and I ran inside. I started screaming her name. The bedroom door was locked, and I screamed her name again. I heard it go off again for the second time.
And I know this part's really hard, Jeremy, but when you did get that door open...
I kicked the door open. I ran in. Just grabbed her hand and I started... I don't remember what. I just called and said, my girlfriend shot herself.
That night, my neighbor gave me a ride over to Jeremy's and Michelle's house. And I said, I just want to go be with her. I just want to hold her hand. As soon as I got there, the deputy who I know says, you can't go any further. You can't go into the house. There's really nothing else that you can do right now. Earlier, when we were at the concert, Michelle was laughing and smiling. What was a great day turned into the worst day of my life. And nothing is ever compared to that pain and that loss. I knew in my heart and in my gut that Michelle didn't kill herself. And instead of going and sitting down with my family and accepting what they had been told, I raised my voice. I said, I demand an outside investigation. I want you guys to stop whatever you're doing right now and bring in the FBI or FDLE or whoever isn't you. I want them to come in. I want them to take over.
My brother is just, I demand an outside investigation at the top of his lungs. But he was told, it's a suicide, sit down, son. That was the tone.
And they stopped doing basic police work. They didn't canvass the street. They didn't talk to neighbors. They didn't talk to friends, family, anything about, what happened leading up to the event.
When we come through training as new deputies, every crime scene where there's a decedent, it is a homicide. It's not a suicide. The medical examiner is the one that makes a determination of how they died.
The medical examiner, Dr. Hoban, did conduct an autopsy on September the 4th. During the autopsy, they found an injury above Michelle's right eye, a small cut. Hoban said that it could have been a cause of the ejected shell casing that came out of the gun. At the scene, they found pills in Michelle O'Connell's pocket and pill bottles in her purse that belonged to Jeremy Banks. They did a test to find out if any of them pills were taken, and there was nothing in her system. And his cause and manner of death is that it was a self-inflicted gunshot. She committed suicide.
When I came back on duty, my sergeant said, you guys need to do your supplement from that night. If you go up into a police report, You can see everybody listed, victim, suspect, other person, which means maybe they conducted interviews in the neighborhood. Really didn't see anybody. Just Jeremy Banks and, of course, the deputies that were on scene, but that was it. Detectives were done. They were done.
So how long after that night before they spoke with you guys again?
I want to say it was like a couple weeks later we had this debriefing. We were cautiously optimistic that science would be on our side, or someone would see through this and stand up and do the right thing.
Hopefully this will give you some closure as to what occurred that night. And I will tell you why I think it's a suicide. Typically women, whenever they know that they're going to commit suicide, it's usually some sort of narcotic that they try to take. They try to overdose. She had several pills.
In her system?
No, there were several in her pocket, 50 pills in her pocket. She had the opportunity where the gun was present, and she utilized it versus the pills. All indications are that she was contemplating suicide based on her texts.
The text messages are the big thing that they're latched on to.
But they didn't reach out to the family to find out what we knew.
I was in communication with her that day and that night, and one of the last things she said to me is, "I'm on my way." I was watching her daughter, my niece, and she never came. It just doesn't add up to me, so maybe it will help add up.
Okay. All right, here's a full copy of the report.
We were shut down. And even though we had family members that worked for the sheriff's office, we're not from one of these families, like Jeremy Banks, from a well-established family in the community. And the sheriff is on record saying he's known his parents for a long time. So here, this almost godfather-like person to Jeremy Banks. Let me just take care of him, and let's just shut this down.
She told me a lot of things about, and I'm just going to spell it out for anyone to hear, domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
She came to my house, she said, "I'm scared." And then that same night, she's gone.
Before that night, were there any other red flags?
He would say, he tells me that I can't wear these things, I can't go out with certain friends. He goes through my phone. He wants to know what I'm spending. She told me about Alexis's behaviors at school changing. She was regressing with potty training. And then she told me, he has a temper. So little bit by little bit, Michelle is telling us things are not good at home. I wanted her to be happy, but Michelle was telling me that Jeremy was becoming physically violent, verbally abusive. It was Alexis's birthday, and I remember seeing Jeremy, he's eating pizza, and he starts grilling Alexis. "Why is so-and-so crying? What did you do? What did you do?" And Alexis is just petrified. He takes my little niece by the arms, and he says, "Answer me." He pulls her up, so little, and I'm sitting there paralyzed, and he shakes her and slams her to the ground, he puts her down so hard. I grabbed Michelle and I said, "I gotta talk to you. Jeremy's out of control." She's like, I know.
What happened the night of the murder?
On September 2nd, we met for lunch, and she told me I'm leaving him. We talked about her plan, and she's like, "There's going to be trouble tonight because he wants to go out after the concert, but I start my new position in the morning, and I got to be ready."
Michelle was a student of mine since 9th grade. September 2010, I got to hire her as a full-time employee for the Child Care Center. She had a natural talent for working with the children. And finally, she had what she called a real job. She said, "Now I can get my own apartment, a place for just she and Alexis." She was excited about her new life, and the only thing wrong in her life was Jeremy. There seemed to be a lot of arguing, and he wasn't very respectful. From things that Michelle had told me, he seemed to have quite a temper.
She said, no, I'm getting out. I was so happy. I was happy and I was afraid. The most deadliest time for a victim is when they choose to leave. She had a plan. She was leaving. He snapped. He killed her. And then this sheriff protected him.
September 2010, Jeremy Banks called 911, saying his girlfriend Michelle O'Connell shot herself.
He's been forthright. He has not been hiding anything.
St. Johns County Sheriff David Shore, Banks' boss, says after a thorough review of the evidence, his conclusion,
if there was any doubt at all in my mind, we would still be investigating this case.
Here we have this idyllic seaside town, and this terrible tragedy happens. A young woman is dead. Her boyfriend says that she killed herself. But there are members of the sheriff's department that doubt that narrative. Michelle's family members adamantly deny that's what has happened. And members of the community are split.
When we realized what we were up against, Michelle's friends and our family kept pushing. Social media, petitions, rallies. I emailed the sheriff endlessly.
More and more we started demanding justice for Michelle and not going away. Our voice was not going to be dismissed.
I reached out to the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the National Domestic Violence, and it was in the news.
We would think that the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office would like some transparency also and show that by ordering a coroner's inquest if they have nothing to hide.
The investigation should continue. There is something suspicious. There's got to be some more evidence, something that hasn't been uncovered.
I'm on my way to meet Clu Wright, a private investigator. Clu pro bono has decided to focus on Michelle's case. Clu Wright is a local. Knows everybody in town, knows the folks who are in the positions of power. He's making this analysis as a member of this community. Clu's assessment of everything will help clear up a lot of my questions. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm well. It's so nice to meet you.
You too.
There is a ton to just dig into.
Well, the family was strongly against the sheriff's office investigating this case to begin with because it was a deputy involved, service weapon. There was a lot of support from the outside too that the sheriff's office should have never investigated one of their own.
Why didn't an independent investigator immediately take charge of the case?
That's a good question, and I probably should have called them in earlier. I think there was a mindset that it was a suicide. We didn't secure statements from some individuals we should have.
4 months after the incident, Sheriff Shore requested the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to conduct an independent investigation.
When our family learned that FDLE was getting involved, an outside investigation, we definitely felt we were on the path to justice for Michelle.
The investigator that they signed to this case was Rusty Rogers. During his investigation, he is starting to collect evidence. He is interviewing numerous people and coming up with a hypothesis of how Michelle O'Connell died.
I met Agent Rogers, and he wanted to do a victimology on my sister. And I said, finally. He was actively asking me questions and challenging me, well, what about this and what about that? And really investigating. Oh, she was getting promotion? Oh, he took her phone sometimes? Oh, you saw Jeremy hurt Alexis? Okay. And my niece Alexis was interviewed by a forensic psychologist that authored an opinion that Alexis was abused at the hands of Jeremy Banks, and Alexis's mother was abused at the hands of Jeremy Banks, and Alexis witnessed it.
The sheriff's office reports the night Michelle O'Connell died, the detectives did not do a canvass of the neighborhood. Agent Rogers canvasses the neighborhood where Jeremy Banks lives at, and he finds two witnesses
Boswell says she was in her garage with another friend and heard a couple arguing.
And then we heard a woman yell for help. Then there was a gunshot, and then there was another yell for help and another gunshot.
And you definitely heard a woman call for help, not once, but twice.
Twice.
He finds 2 ear witnesses that say they heard a woman scream and gunshots. What else does Rogers uncover?
He tested for DNA of the gun. They said they found none of Jeremy Banks' DNA on the gun.
Service weapon was Jeremy's. What does it tell you that there isn't any of his DNA on this weapon?
Somebody wiped that gun clean. Jeremy Banks' DNA should be on that gun.
Okay. The location of the gun becomes another very important piece of evidence. Tell me about that.
Michelle O'Connell is a right-handed person. The gun was found on her left side. If she's right-handed, how did the gun get to her left side?
How did the sheriff's department explain all of the issues? Explain to me what the second medical examiner's theory was. How did Michelle shoot herself?
Well, Dr. Bulick is the chief medical examiner, forensic pathologist. They asked him to revisit the case and render an opinion. Dr. Bulick, he come up with a different theory of how he thought Michelle O'Connell committed suicide. He copied and pasted some stuff on a piece of paper with some measurements. But in this picture, you'll see Dr. Bulick, how he thinks she received the injury above her eye. He holds the gun upside down. Michelle sticks the gun in her mouth, and when she fires, the tack light went forward and caused the injury to her eye. Well, anybody that has any knowledge in service weapons know that when you fire that gun, doesn't matter what position you have, it recoils backwards.
Yeah, I've never heard of a gun jumping forward.
Dr. Bulick gave his opinion and ruled it a suicide, and that's what the sheriff's office ran with.
But other experts disagreed, right?
Yeah. Agent Rogers hired a forensic expert, Mr. Finley. They did a lot of forensics on the gun, the firing of the gun. He shoots it with the left hand, the right hand upside down. Dr. Finley says there's no way that Michelle O'Connell could have shot herself in this position with this gun upside down. Also, my question would be, if somebody was to shoot herself, you would expect a large amount of blood would be visible somewhere on the carpet, on the floor, on the shirt, on the bed. There's no blood from her neck down. All the blood flow is running down the side of her face.
As facts of the case came out, as told to us by Agent Rogers, everyone on my shift walked out and said, "Are you kidding me? He killed her." I was devastated.
Agent Rogers presents a PowerPoint show to the medical examiner's office, and the reason why he thinks Michelle O'Connell did not shoot herself. And during that presentation is when Dr. Hoban changed the death certificate from a suicide to a homicide.
Agent Rusty Rogers does the investigation. What happens next?
What happened was the FDLE did their investigation. It was presented to the state attorney, who at the time was R.J. Larissa. It felt good. It felt like someone's going to listen. This is now in the right hands. And I was very hopeful that there would be, charges. An investigator who works for the state attorney's office called me, and they want to talk about Michelle. We know something terrible happened to your daughter. We need permission to exhume her. I broke into tears, and I was shaking. And I thought, they're going to see what really happened. They know something's up. They really do.
I heard while I was working that there was a warrant for Jeremy. I thought Rusty Rogers had gotten enough evidence to go ahead and arrest him for this homicide.
For the exhumation, they were going to send me a form to sign. For 2 weeks, nobody sends me no form.
My mom never heard from them again. And then R.J. Larissa, the state attorney, writes a letter to our then governor and says, I need to recuse myself because I'm too involved with the sheriff, and all the information was sent to another state attorney, Brad King, whom ordered his own investigation and had a former medical examiner review the case. And this medical examiner says, I think it was a suicide. And that was the second worst day of my life. Brad King, in our family meeting, said something along the lines of, it'd be terrible to accuse a man of a crime he didn't do.
Did you have anything to do with Michelle's death?
No,
Did
sir.
you kill Michelle?
No, sir. I remember visiting her grave, and a friend of hers showed up, and we sat and talked, and she asked me that question too. My answer is always going to be the same. No.
After the Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigation, it gets shut down. And I went in and I talked to the detectives. And I said, why was I just informed that this case is going nowhere? That you are not arresting Jeremy Banks? I was livid. This is a copy of an email I sent Brad King. There's a code of silence in law enforcement. We don't tell on each other. We don't rat each other out. Because you might be running into that gunfight alone. The blue or green line. It's not thin. It's really thick. And when you're on the wrong side of that line, I sent Mr. King this email. Dr. Hoban made a statement that when he changed the death certificate, he was convinced it was probably homicide. He said those words. What would it hurt to at least let this go in front of a jury? I would write this again.
We have Jeremy Banks with us and his parents. I've known both of them for many, many, many years. This guy right here came so damn close to being charged with homicide. It's scary.
We then get introduced to Clue Wright, and he reaches out to our family and says, there's something wrong. I'm going to do my own personal investigation.
He said, Patty, I need permission to exhume Michelle. And he said, I'm going to have a medical examiner do another autopsy. And I said, okay. He just wants the truth.
You ask Michelle's family if you can exhume Michelle's body 4 years after her death. And that was the autopsy that you guys have been fighting for years.
Now we have the opportunity to do it. I found a forensic pathologist, Dr. William Anderson, and he agreed to conduct the second autopsy of Michelle O'Connell for free.
That's huge.
It is huge.
I'm Dr. William Anderson. I am a forensic pathologist. I've probably done about 9,000 autopsies. Suicides in the thousands, many of which are gunshot wounds, and many homicides. Clue Wright contacted me because he wanted me to look into this case to see whether or not this was a suicide. The first thing I did was to look at all the information we have and see if there's anything that's unusual. And right away, there were a couple of red flags that came up. There was on the x-ray, it looked like a fracture of the mandible or the jawbone. That was a problem because it had not been reported in the medical examiner's report. I felt we needed to go ahead and do an exhumation.
We had to get with the cemetery and get everything signed and done in accordance with the laws of Florida. The body was exhumed. We wanted to keep this a secret from anybody and everybody until after the autopsy was done. It took a little while. I kept aggravating him and said, listen, Dr. Anderson, I'm an impatient person. Come on, you got to do this report. So finally he got it back to me, and when I looked at that report, I'm like, that's great news.
What does the new autopsy report show?
Dr. Anderson told me that her mandible straight down the middle of her jawbone, and it was fractured all the way through.
So her chin was broken in half?
Her chin was broken in half, yes.
That's a really like strong bone. It's like the strongest bone in your head, right?
Yes. So he was saying it would take a significant amount of force, you know, like a boxer or getting in a wreck or some type of kicking force to really break that.
In doing this autopsy, my conclusion was, looking at all the pattern of injuries, the blow to the jaw, which is enough to incapacitate her, stun her at least, and then the gunshot is fired. The gunshot is fired in a way that strongly indicates that she did not have reflex capability to prevent her tongue from being forced into the back of her mouth, which would mean she was unconscious, or at least areflexive at the time.
This feels like a bombshell.
It is a bombshell.
In domestic violence cases, showing that there's an attack, showing that there's an abuse is such an important part of creating what happened, the story of what happened, like the victimology.
The report from Dr. Anderson showed that Michelle's jaw was fractured. Michelle was battered, and there was a struggle, and Michelle was murdered. There was a crime. It was not a suicide.
We continue an I-Team investigation of new autopsy findings in the controversial death of a St. Augustine woman, Michelle O'Connell.
Since this came out, St. Johns County Sheriff David Shore, who has for years stood by the initial findings that this was a suicide, penned a lengthy and scathing letter saying, "The information presented today is nothing new, and all was reviewed during the initial autopsy. Molesting Michelle from her place of rest using some freelance type approach is beyond unconventional. It was reprehensible."
You get to a point, you got to tell yourself to slow down because you're overlooking things. I started looking into the crime scene photos. There's 8 photographs that were taken by a deputy before anything was moved. There is a shirt that's on the bed. It's right above her head. So I zoomed in on that shirt. I jumped up and I'm like, what the hell? It appears to have a gunshot hole in it. You can see the jagged edges with gunpowder, blood. You can almost tell that there's an outline of a gun. This shirt was never tested. I submitted this photograph to a forensic photographer to look at this shirt. The St. Johns County Sheriff's Office, State Attorney's Office, they use this same person on their cases. In his professional opinion, there's a bullet hole in that shirt. My theory is that shirt was put over Michelle O'Connell's face, that gun was shoved into her mouth, and that gun was fired. That's why you see no other blood on the floor or anywhere else except running down the side of her face.
This is a massive piece of evidence.
This is the most important forensic evidence at that scene. I think it will break this case wide open.
I never realized how powerful the sheriff in a town could be and how people can misuse that power. But this experience with my sister, watching all these twists and all these mishandlings, it's changed how I look at people. The new sheriff is Bobby Hardwick, and I hope he is motivated to do the right thing.
I'm glad that she has you. You have such a strength, and I don't know how you do it, and I'm sure there are days that are worse or better than others.
I have perpetual hope that the right information will get in the right hands and the right person will care, and be moved by this story. And I think someday I'll come out here and I'll say, I did it, we did it. I will, because it's just like,
yeah, I know. I know.
It's just like a promise.
The only 2 people that really know what happened that night are Michelle and Jeremy. And yet there are members of the Sheriff's Department, members of the community, who have very real concerns about how the investigation played out. And so at the very least, put the information in front of a grand jury. Hope lies with good people coming forward and doing work that is hard. When you know something is wrong, there's no one else to come in and fix it. You have to do it.
A hitman shot a dentist in Edgewater, Florida, in broad daytime in the office.
Being a small town, there was a lot of rumor and speculation.
They allege incest, inbreeding.
The attorney was snorting cocaine off toilet seats in a strip club at the very same time that he's representing people in a first-degree murder case.
It sounded like something out of a movie, and now it has come to a real-life drama in Edgewater, the little quiet hometown.
We are in Edgewater, Florida, which is a small coastal town. The very literal name. It is right on the edge of the Indian River. It is a community built around life on the water.
It's wonderful here. We get to watch the dolphin, occasionally a big turtle, sometimes a manatee.
It's cute. It is block after block of these ranch homes. It's one of those places that set out to be aesthetically pleasing. And it makes you feel like you're in a Tim Burton movie driving through this town. Look, there are the Edward Scissorhands topiaries right there. He's been here.
I know all my neighbors, and it's still a small town kind of thing, but no place is immune from the evils of the world.
Here in Edgewater, a man named Norman Laslier set up a very successful dentistry office. He worked with his wife, Virginia. She was his office manager. And they built a beautiful life together. They had a huge house, they had a tennis court, yachts, and a big, beautiful family. And then one day in 1991, a masked gunman comes into their office during their lunch break, and all of a sudden, everything that they had built together was gone.
What's the problem, ma'am?
Just after 1 o'clock, we received the call at dispatch. We have a shooting at the dentist office in the north end of town.
Ma'am, is the guy that shot him gone?
He's gone. I just can't leave him. Please send us an ambulance. We need an ambulance.
My detectives responded and determined the gentleman that had been shot was the dentist, Norman Laslier. He was bleeding out, and they were taking him to the hospital. They couldn't get any statement from him before he passed. That afternoon, Virginia Laslier was there when the detective arrived, and Emma, who was working in the office, we started getting their statements. And according to Emma, the door opened, somebody with a shotgun and a mask came into the dentist's office, and she was terrified. And Virginia, she described the shooter came in with a shotgun, shot her poor husband, and she tried to grab him as he ran out, but she didn't know who the shooter was.
Norman Laslier's murder in 1991 has remained controversial for the last 3 decades. And so we're going to go talk to one person who has been a constant in this case since the beginning, and that's private investigator Gary McDaniel. Hi, Gary.
Hello.
I'm Hillary.
Hello. My pleasure.
Can you give us a little bit of backstory about the Larzalier family?
Norman Larzalier was an accomplished dentist. Everyone described Norman as just a sweet, outgoing guy, but he wasn't much of a businessman. And when he married Virginia Larzalier, who was a very accomplished bookkeeper, they became a very good team. Her being the business person she was and him being the technical expert he was. She came into the marriage with 2 children, Jason and Jessica. And Norman liked them so much that he actually adopted them. And later, they had David and Ben. It was a close family.
Yeah.
To anybody that knew them, it was an ideal relationship with husband and wife running a business together and both prospering.
What was the official police report when they got to the scene?
Virginia says she and Norman were going to go to lunch, but Virginia says, I have to pay the bills and so forth. Honey, you go. Norman went to lunch, comes back to his office, and then we know from witnesses that Norman heard a noise. And he went down the hallway to investigate. He sees an intruder with a gun, and he runs in the opposite direction of the intruder. Shotgun blast goes through the door that Norman is slammed behind him and hits him, and he goes down. Virginia jumps up to go to the aid of Norman. She steps into a side hallway with an exit door outside, and she collides with the assailant. He stumbles, she's clawing at him. He gets up and he runs, she looks out the door, and she sees the assailant's car leave.
What exactly does she see?
She describes the assailant by approximate height, approximate weight, olive skin, dark hair with a ponytail, black clothing, black shoes, and even down to the body odor. And she describes the car, Toyota or Saab, possibly blue, and she gives a partial plate. And she said it had a motorcycle escort as the car sped away.
Was it clear from the beginning whether they thought this was an intentional murder or if this was a robbery gone wrong?
Initially, they thought, what burglar would burglarize a place in the broad daylight?
Was there anything missing?
Yes, there was. In the safe, the door was open. There was some volume missing and some gold coins.
What physical evidence did they collect that day?
The Edgewater Police Department brought in Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Their forensics included shotgun residual on the door and obviously the pellets that are found in Norman Larzalier. But they got limited forensic evidence.
Law enforcement was questioning the Larzaliers and questioning anyone who was close to the Larzaliers. My name is David Hendry. I've been practicing criminal defense work for 23 years. Police questioned Stephen Heidel several times. He was an individual who befriended Jason Larzalier, Virginia's son, and was kind of like a butler or kind of a family assistant, living in the house and running errands for the Larzalier family.
Stephen Heidel was always a suit kind of guy, very distinguished. He was a handsome young man. So he convinced Virginia that he had value in Jason's life.
Jason is Virginia's son from her first marriage.
Right. At the time, he was about 19 years of age. He really didn't have his bearings in life. He wasn't really that responsible. Jason was in college, and he had some health issues. I believe he had seizures from time to time. If he didn't take the medication, it was a problem for him. And so Virginia made a deal. Stephen, you can be his roommate. I'll pay you $200 a week. Just make sure he stays on his meds and make sure he stays in school. But there's a whole other side of Stephen Heidel. Heidel was under investigation for bank fraud. After the murder, the police go to Heidel. But he tells the police, I didn't know anything about the murder.
Then there was Kristen Palmieri. She worked in the dental office, would run errands and would do odd jobs, just kind of like hanging on.
Kristen had actually been living part-time in a room at the Larzalier home.
Why?
You have to understand, Virginia was the type that would help an underdog, because Virginia came up out of the mobile home kind of environment. Virginia was trying her best to make a productive employee out of Kristen Palmieri, but Kristen had stolen a couple coins out of the safe and had pawned them. And eventually they terminated her about 7 to 10 days before the murder. Police talked to her. She denied that she was terminated. She, in fact, told the police she was working that day. She provides that she didn't really see anything. She had taken lunch off that day from work.
She says she was at the dental office that she's been fired from.
Correct. She put herself right in it as an active employee. She says she came back to this turmoil with the ambulance and the police and everybody else.
So does Kristen speak with law enforcement that night? What is it, March 8th?
She has not a whole lot to contribute on March 8th.
Well, 4 days after the shooting, Virginia came into my office and wanted to know if we were making any progress. To me, she didn't look like a bereaving widow. She was well-dressed, made sure I knew she was well-dressed. My impression was that Virginia was intent on being a rich, good-looking woman. And she just wanted to know how quickly we could get this done so her papers could get cleared from the court, talking about that she couldn't get her insurance money until the case was closed.
They looked into the insurance policies, and there were several life insurance policies, and the total was approximately $2 million that would have served as the motive in law enforcement's eyes as to why she would have committed this murder.
We did a background on her, of course, only to find out that she was well known in the bars in the area. She was in the bars, out of the bars, back in the bars, out of the bars, during the night. Virginia was sleeping with a lot of people. She was a player.
So she's been having affairs with these other guys. Do they go and they talk to these other guys?
They do.
And what do those guys
say?
They
admit and validate there were some affairs.
Uh-huh.
They say she talked about having her husband killed, talked about money.
Okay, so these guys say Virginia offered money to kill her husband.
We located at least 2 boyfriends who gave us information that Virginia was asking them to kill her husband. She promised them $100,000, new cars, whatever. It was just insane.
Did the police believe that any of these guys were the actual shooter?
No.
Seemed to be up front with it. There had no reason for them to lie. And Virginia had everything going for her except she wanted more. And her way to get more was marry a rich man and then get him killed.
So Virginia's situation looks bad, but she obviously was not the gunman. And so once police start looking at her, how do they start unraveling who was under that mask?
There was a patient in the waiting room, and she said, I heard Norman say, Jason, is that you?
Jason is Virginia's son from her first marriage.
Right.
At that point, we didn't know anything other than the word Jason coming up. We didn't know if he was asking for Jason or whether Jason was the shooter. We don't know.
The police knew that Stephen Heidel was a roommate of Jason Lazalier. So the police go talk to Stephen Heidel. And Stephen Heidel's modifying his statement. And he says, I know some things. And what is it you know? He says, Jason told me I'm going to make a lot of money and I'm going to do real well. I'm going to buy that new car I'm looking at. And what else does Heidel tell him? He says, Jason had a shotgun in the house and he cut off the barrel of a shotgun. He says there are shavings from a shotgun on the floor.
They must have been so excited.
Oh, they went right to the apartment with a search warrant and they collected the metal shavings, put it in an evidence bag, and they were all ready.
The detectives put together the statements from witnesses and said, boss, I think Virginia was the one responsible for the killing and Jason was probably the shooter.
Why would Jason kill his father for his mother? What's the reasoning there?
Well, their inference was that there was an unusual relationship between Jason and his mother, and that Jason would do anything for his mother, and both of them would do anything for money.
The whole town just had this great suspicion that she's got to be guilty. There was a lot of rumor and speculation that she was a manipulator, domineering. They painted a very bad picture of her.
In the course of that investigation, there were leaks to the media that were unconscionable. I mean, they were slanderous and they were unsubstantiated.
When Dr. Lazalier was killed, it was very, very big news. It was all over the TV stations. I'm Pravette Bryant, a former courts reporter for the Orlando Sentinel. A current affair reported on an incestuous relationship that Virginia Lazalier and her son Jason had together. It was very shocking for those who looked at them as a perfect family. How could this take place? And that only added fuel to the fire as far as how the story and the plot and the sensationalism of it all, that she hired her own son to kill her husband.
By this time, 4, 5, 6 days in the investigation, we were pretty sure of who was responsible for the killing. This was not a mystery. Our big problem was we had to prove it. The best way we're going to prove this thing is to have someone tell us what happened.
What information does Stephen Heidel and Kristen Palmieri give to law enforcement?
They've already given 5 to 6 statements that really are not concrete. So the police begin to realize Kristen Palmieri and Stephen Heidel knew more.
Okay.
I thought all 4 of them were deeply involved in this whole scheme. Now Palmieri and Heidel got to thinking, this is not going to go good.
Police corner Heidel and Palmieri and say, y'all have not been truthful. You know more. We need to know it all.
The time is 12:43 hours. We're at the Edgewater Police Department. What I want from you is I want the truth, and I want to know everything that you know.
I still don't. Okay, I can't say that I know Virginia and Jason didn't do it. In my mind, I can say that they did it, but I still don't want to believe it.
Let's stop at this point. I want you to start being a little more knowledgeable like you really are, okay? Because you're not no idiot.
Kristen and Stephen knew that they needed to cooperate with law enforcement, provide law enforcement with whatever information law enforcement wanted in order to obtain convictions against Virginia and Jason.
Has Virginia ever referred to the murder itself of Jason doing the shooting?
She said once that Jason never screwed up this bad before or something like that. And Jason, when I flat out asked him if he did it, he said yes, that he did.
And ultimately, Heidel and Palmieri pointed the finger at Virginia and Jason.
Did Virginia ever at any time come out and say anything about her involvement in the death of Norman, or did you ever hear her?
I mean, admit it? She didn't say yes, she just nodded her head.
They decided to tell the authorities. Would it help if I told you where the weapons are?
So you've got these 2 young people working for the Larslier family that say, you know what? We know where the murder weapon is. Law enforcement, what's their take?
Ooh, bingo, lightning flashes.
Heidel and Palmieri told me they knew where the murder weapon was. I said, well, it's in the next county off of Route 95 in a river.
Palmieri and Heidel told law enforcement that Virginia was controlling them and directing them. Yes, the weapons were inside Virginia's house. And yes, Virginia wanted us to just get rid of them.
We went back to Virginia's, and she had me wipe down a handgun, which I was told was Jason's. Stephen came downstairs, and he had some kind of long garden thing with cement in it.
They mixed up some ready concrete, poured it in, they put the weapons in there, allowed it to harden, put it in the back of their car.
And she said to just go take that and get rid of it. And him and I went for a long drive, and we got rid of it somewhere off of 95.
We got a diver from the local sheriff's department to go into the river, found a piece of cement, brought that back to the detective bureau.
They x-ray it and they find out inside the concrete is a shotgun and a pistol.
Potentially the murder weapon. They've got everything they need. And what happens next?
They do a search warrant of Virginia's house. They found a pot of concrete. Investigatively, it's the best lead they could have.
Virginia maintained her innocence, but she wouldn't take a lie detector test. I know she thought she could talk anybody out of anything, except she didn't this time.
The reason why I'm questioning you is you've been placed under arrest for the homicide of your father, Norman Larslier. Do you wish to have an attorney now?
for this question?
It surprised us that it was Jason, because I didn't think he had the stones to do it. That was just my impression when I first saw him.
Wow, what kind of relationship do you have with your mother?
Mother and son relationship. She's someone I look up to, and she's always been there for me, giving me advice and telling me what to do.
Would you say she's domineering?
No.
Is she the dominant in your relationship with her, or are you a take charge kind of person?
No, I'm not a take charge type person. I like when people tell me what to do, and then I'll do it. I don't make decisions for myself very well.
Here you have a woman conspire with her son to kill his stepfather. That was just unheard of. It really began to explode in the media. The murder was the first time this type of sensational story occurred in Edgewater, which is a very small community. And so it took off like wildfire.
The first case is more intricate and involved than anything Hollywood could dream up. It involves drugs and infidelity and bisexuality, conspiracy, murder, and even a butler.
The media kind of hung her up from day one. It was like, oh, we've got to find somebody because this thing just doesn't happen, especially in a small, sleepy town.
I looked at what evidence available to me, which was very little. But on the basics, I never saw this as a hit. Because no hitman would shoot through a door and run away and not know whether or not he hit his target. That's common sense. When I conduct an investigation, I try to find something about the people involved. I found that there was 30-something witnesses that were prepared to testify to various subject matters relevant to the defense of Virginia Lazalier, which included the inconsistent statements by Kristen and Stephen Heidel, and witnesses that would have impeached their veracity. But I'd had a falling out with the defense counsel over some ethical choices that they were making. So I left the investigation the latter part of August. My defense investigation by the time of Virginia Lazalier's trial is fruitful, but a long ways from being complete. And I wrote an extensive memo of the things they needed to do.
The state called these witnesses to testify against Virginia Lazalier to say, yes, I was having an affair with her, and yes, she was looking to have someone kill her husband. But a lot of people testified that it's just a joke. And they said, we thought that she was just joking around. But the fact that she had put that out there was very damaging.
So during Virginia's trial, the prosecution present her affairs, they present the insurance policy, they present these guns found in concrete, and they present a pot with concrete residue from her home.
That's right. And I think the prosecutors brought in about 18 to 20-something witnesses, but the defense only brought in 2 witnesses, and the testimony lasted maybe an hour.
So Virginia's defense team did not use the information that you had gathered in your investigation. And so what's the verdict?
Guilty of first-degree murder in the state of Florida, carried a death penalty, and she was ultimately sentenced to death.
I'm Virginia Lazalier. I am incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections. When they came back saying guilty, I was devastated. And he sentenced me to death. I was taken back to the jail and transported to Broward and began serving a death sentence. I had already lost Norm, and then I lost my family. I never got to see my kids again. I have a strong faith. And I stayed on my knees for the next 18 months.
Jason called me in fear and said, you've got to get me another attorney. And I found a competent attorney I'd worked with before by the name of William Lasley. And then Lasley and I met as it related to the previous evidence that I'd acquired and a strategy that we should evoke going forward.
And what was that strategy?
My strategy was simple. Call the witnesses. And that's what Bill Lasley decided to do. He called in approximately 25 or 28 witnesses.
So they heard all this information in Jason's trial that they didn't hear in Virginia's.
Right.
What is the outcome of Jason's trial?
Jason is acquitted as the triggerman that allegedly conspired with his mother to kill his stepfather.
We were watching television in the Volusia County Jail, and it interrupted the program to show the footage that he was found not guilty. I immediately jumped up and down and was ecstatic, and I was so happy.
So, how does the prosecution explain how Virginia could have hired her son to be a hitman, but a jury has found Jason not guilty of being a hitman?
That's a question of law. It's above my pay grade.
Virginia Larzalier's trial, in my opinion, was a farce. My name is Shirley Bates, and I'm an attorney out of Tallahassee, Florida. Jack Wilkins was Virginia's attorney who represented her in her trial. I really hesitate to call him her attorney because he didn't act like an attorney. He didn't do his job.
They did not use the evidence available to them or the witnesses available to them. And from my perspective, they were guilty of ineffective assistance.
The prosecution even said that she smelled alcohol on Jack Wilkins during the trial. He was supposed to be listening to witness testimony and preparing cross-examinations, and that's really difficult to do if you're drunk or high or both, which he apparently was.
We found witnesses that said that he was basically drinking like a fish, and he was doing drugs. He's doing methamphetamine, he's doing cocaine, he's going through 2-liter bottles of vodka every day, at the very same time that he's representing Virginia Larzalier. I've been doing this post-conviction work for 20 years now. I've never seen anything quite like this case. He's the worst of the worst.
Jack Wilkins was an alcoholic and drug addict. Virginia was deprived of a defense by her own attorneys.
At the time of him representing Virginia Larzalier, a lot of complaints were coming in related to him taking large sums of cash and not really providing proper representation. Jack Wilkins' MO as a criminal defense attorney was to meet with his clients, like in a parking lot, and obtain large amounts of cash, like $15,000, $20,000. And then he would go back to his office and he would tell his bookkeeper, now report that as I received $5,000. So after Virginia's trial, he was convicted of tax fraud. He was convicted of lying to the grand jury. So he's a convicted perjurer, ultimately went to federal prison.
Her attorney was a little less than competent. In one way, I was glad she didn't have Perry Mason. On the other hand, I didn't want it to be thrown out and do the whole thing over again.
We were challenging the conviction and we were challenging the death sentence. One of the most significant failures of trial counsel in this case is there's not one expert consulted by the defense at trial.
He failed to challenge the state's case in any way. No experts to counter their experts, as far as with the weapons and stuff, or even making points to prove that Heidel and Palmieri changed their testimony and how it seemed to evolve in the way that the law enforcement wanted it to evolve.
A couple weeks after the trial, I received a phone call from a juror, and she said, I feel pretty bad about it because we couldn't believe Palmieri, we couldn't believe Heidel, we could not believe either one of them. But if the defense would have given us something to hold on to, we'd have probably acquitted her. That shotgun didn't match any of the forensic evidence at the crime scene. The weapon in the river had a full barrel on it.
The whole thing is that Heidel says Jason sawed off a shotgun in the apartment. You're telling me that the shotgun that was recovered was not sawed off.
Was not sawed off, and in fact was inoperable. So there's no shavings to match the shavings in the apartment.
So the concrete that the two weapons were found in, was that ever traced back to Virginia?
No.
When I deposed Detective Gamel, who was the lead detective on the case, I asked him, what was the most significant piece of evidence against Virginia Larzalier? And he cited the concrete from Virginia Larzalier's house, matched the concrete that encased the weapons in Pellicer Creek. That was very peculiar because he had it wrong. Because the FBI report said these concretes are different. These concretes do not match.
The problem is, law enforcement, they're acting on the premise of what Heidel told them, that that's the weapons. That we were summoned to Virginia's house, encased them in concrete, and dumped them in the river within days of the murder. And it's a lie. We brought an algae expert that simply said the guns couldn't have been in the water shortly after the murder, as the witness Paul Mary and Heidel say. It could have only been there a day or two. You're dealing in South Florida in brackish water, and there's going to be slime on it. If it's in there for more than 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to find barnacles on it. And it was fresh concrete, which was visually obvious.
So the guns did not go into the water in March, like Kristen and Stephen originally said they did. Those guns could only have been put in the water in early May, right before they led investigators to go scuba dive and pick them up.
That's right.
What do you make of all of that?
It's consistent with the theory that Heidel and Paul Mary are framing Virginia and Jason, which begs the question, why?
Paul Mary and Heidel, their credibility was zero. And they were such liars that the state admitted in their closing argument that they were obviously lying and that they obviously had beforehand knowledge of this murder.
I went looking to find out what else they knew. As a defense investigator, I wanted to know about the weapons. I discovered weapons were stolen.
Okay, so these are stolen guns. This isn't a gun that Virginia had before, or that Norman had before, or that Jason had before.
Correct. The weapons were stolen from the Oak Ridge gun shop in Orlando.
So if you can figure out who stole those guns, you can figure out who's involved with this shooting.
Exactly. And I gathered a bunch of police reports. The weapons were stolen by a group I refer to as the Harvey Gang, a local group of burglars. From the police reports, I gathered photographs of individuals that were involved in the gun shop burglary. And then I peeled back who were their known associates. I found that those burglars are connected to Heidel and Paul Mary. This one, allegedly, was a lover of Stephen Heidel.
Is there any way that Virginia was tied to these guys, or that Jason was tied to these guys?
I explored all of that, and they're not connected to Virginia, and they're not connected to Jason. Then I asked known associates of the Harvey Gang, do you know if they were in the area of Edgewater, Florida on March 8th? And they said yes. Every year this motorcycle event took place in the area. They go every year, they go over there to steal motorcycles and other things, but this time the associates said they came back was really different. They were scared to death.
So the Harvey Gang comes back the day of the murder.
Yes.
Acting all weird.
Correct. And I asked, when they came back from there, did they have any medication? Oh, funny you should mention that. They had a bottle of commercial pills. What about gold coins? Oh, yeah, they had gold coins.
So their associates are telling you all of these things.
Correct. So I now know the weapons encased in concrete are connected to a group of burglars, and those burglars are connected to Heidel and Paul Mary. I think this was a planned burglary. I believe Kristen and Stephen solicited the Harvey Gang to get the job done. Interesting enough, a bank clerk tells the police that before the murder, she saw Kristen Palmieri circling the block. She was the lookout, and she told them, I can let you in, I can open up the safe, you guys do the rest. But they didn't expect Virginia or Norman or anybody to be there because they routinely went to lunch during the day.
So the prosecutors, they're saying this was a hit made to look like a robbery. And you're saying this was a robbery that accidentally became a murder.
Exactly.
What did Stephen and Kristen stand to gain by pointing the finger at Virginia and Jason?
They could live because the people that actually perpetrated the crime, I think, were very dangerous people. And I'm sure behind the scenes, they made it very clear, if we go down, you go down.
Had anybody else followed up on these leads, they would have arrived at the same place you did.
I did what they did not do because they discounted that information from the onset. Remember, the first things out of Virginia's mouth was, I described the assailant, I described the car, I gave him a partial number. I don't know why they're coming after me. They believed initially, right away, that Virginia's description of the assailant couldn't be true because it was so detailed.
Yeah.
There's nobody that ever got this type of a statement from a witness on a murder. The color of the car, the motorcycles, everything was like a movie she saw. Everything like was fantasized or whatever.
So they never believed her. But did anyone ever corroborate Virginia's story?
Well, in 1994, a TV production team is filming the Norman Lauzalier office in Edgewater. And a young man walks up to them and says, I saw the murderer leave that day. They call me immediately on the phone. I meet this young man by the name of Danny. Danny tells a very solid story. I was on my motorbike near the office.
I just recall seeing a man running out of the door. He seemed to have, dark clothes on, long sleeve, gloves, a mask. Seemed to have a little gun, about a sawed-off shotgun maybe. And he jumped in his car and he took off in a hurry. But that's what caught my eyes because, you're not supposed to be seeing people running out of dentist offices with guns.
He says, I was scared. When I saw that guy running with a gun, I dropped that gear down, I revved that engine up, and I got out of there.
Yeah.
Suddenly it hits me. He just confirmed what Virginia thought was a motorcycle escort. Now, in the legal business, we call that newly discovered evidence.
Virginia was convicted based on circumstantial evidence and statements provided by two people who lied. And on the idea that she was some sort of sexual manipulator with nothing to substantiate their claims. And the state still chose to sentence her to death. And now there's a new witness, too.
Our goal in post-conviction was to show that the conviction and the death sentence was unreliable. When your client faces the ultimate penalty of death, you want to uncover anything and everything in your client's background. In this case, we were able to get into Virginia Lauzalier's childhood. Virginia was the oldest of the children in the family. Her father was a monster. He was molesting, sexually violating the entire family. Virginia would step up to protect her sisters and protect her family. How noble to put herself up to protect her younger siblings. And this is crucial to present this type of evidence to a jury that she had some value as a human being, that she was worthy of living and not being executed at the hands of the state.
This lady has now been in prison for 30 years. She is going to be 70 years old, almost half of her life in prison. How do you not give somebody a new trial?
Thank you so much for having us. There's a lot to dig into in this case. When were you first aware of Virginia's case?
So I came into the case around the end of 2019. It doesn't take much in reviewing to figure out that she didn't get the defense she deserved. There was a lot of media coverage and a lot of this sensationalism, about what a bad person Virginia was. Sex addict, black widow, gold digger, all those names.
As a woman,
right?
What is your assessment of how she was portrayed?
They just look at it different if a woman's sexually active or promiscuous. A man can be, and then he's masculine and he's,
conqueror.
Right, but a woman is.
Right, and they make her out to be an absolute villain.
And it is kind of crazy because they were both cheating.
Really?
Norman Lauzalier. He had outside relationships also, but he's a man.
So was anything made of his affairs?
No, it was not. You know, men will do what men will do.
What does she do next?
Our goal is eventually to get her conviction overturned. The state's theory was that she conspired with Jason. Mm-hmm. Well, Jason was acquitted. So there's some case law out there that says that can't happen. If your co-conspirator is acquitted of this crime, that you cannot then be convicted of it because who did you conspire with?
Virginia, hi. I'm so happy to see you.
Very nice to meet you.
So, I have to ask you, did you conspire to kill your husband?
No. I never solicited anyone. I never aided anyone. I never abetted anyone.
Was there any part of you that wanted him gone?
No. Norman was a great guy. We were best friends. He's the father of my children. Mm-hmm. I was very promiscuous. But as long as Norm was okay with what I did, and as long as I was okay with what he did, we didn't think it was anyone else's business. I thought that our private life was our private life, and it's not. I'm sorry that my life choices put me in a position to be found guilty when I'm not. Wipe away the media, innuendos, slander. All I've ever asked is to look at the facts and look at the evidence. I will continue to fight to clear my name.
Is that why you're still fighting?
Yes, that's my goal, and I won't stop fighting until somebody listens.
As a woman, this case and the media firestorm around it makes me very uncomfortable. Virginia did not take the stand. Her defense mounted no defense. It just leaves this big gaping hole for the prosecutor and the media to say whatever they want to say about you. And then it's gospel. It's so much harder to push back against that from a cell. And if she's innocent, what a horrific situation.
人我操！哎，真不好说，这不是一个级别的。那个，哎，这200不算贵，比北京那便宜。哎，我跟北京跳那个，就刚才你们看那视频，那是一个小湖，你知道吧？那个小湖，你给人感觉吧，反正也挺吓人。我操，这他妈面对整个大海，从那往下跳，远处，哎呦，我操，那制空感，妈吓死个人呀！吓死个人呀！这动漫体验是什么？哦，玩3D 啊！哦，这是玩3D 的，穿越瞬间发生。没。有喝的吗？来瓶喝的。有屋子这有风。
下边来杯奶茶吧。
哎呦，特别的。特别的。我也看。不吃了。我这美食肚子，我得留着晚上吃。 遛弯看电用。我觉得咱不能吃这个，是不是？咱们拉倒，要不就吃外头的，不能把肚子浪费在这上。王哥游泳别起码跳，我跳过，还跳过。火箭蹦迪这边啊，火箭蹦迪我也不蹦。上回那蹦是祥云哥刷了那个6个超火，4个超火，不是几个也忘了，反正是3、4个大超火我才上去的。那玩的命了那是。现在我不跳了，现在他妈是要命的，要命。那会儿年轻还行，那会儿我才39岁，现在都40了，不行了。那会儿我30多岁还能干这事儿，现在40多了干不了这事儿了。这已经被废弃了，看来都没人用了。还真是100万热度。你看那岛也没多大，感觉确实没多大，都是个人工岛。那就是个人工岛，就是个人工岛。啊，这上面都是游乐，是他呀弄了一个人工岛，然后呢就拿一些人为玩的玩意儿建造下来了，不是什么自然风景区，这是一个人工岛，应该是啊，人建了一个人工岛，没有什么这小孩玩的，一小游乐场，主要就是这个索道。我跟你说，就是这索道赚钱，这基本我都没人玩，基本是没人玩。